She was a young mother trying to leave the street life behind.
She wanted to set a good example for her daughter.
She'd already enrolled in college.
She was trying to become a nurse.
She really set her sights on a new life.
But she would never get the chance.
There was smoke coming out of the house.
There apparently had been food burning on the stove.
There was a trail of blood that led to her body.
She was shot twice in her face.
Had her life on the streets finally caught up to her?
A lot of young people don't understand what comes with that lifestyle.
Most of the homicides that I covered were related to drugs.
Was it a more personal motive?
She had no clothing from her waist down.
Was she sexually assaulted?
Or did someone see her new life as a threat?
She had to leave him.
He wanted to continue that lifestyle.
And without her, he was nothing.
December 20th, 1996. Christmas is just around the corner in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, a city of 50,000, 2 hours west of Philly.
Harrisburg is very interesting in that it is the capital city of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So there are a lot of opportunities here, lots of jobs and state government. But then when you look within certain parts of the city, you do see where there are impoverished people.
And in 1996, there are few places in Harrisburg more impoverished than the Allison Hill neighborhood.
It's a community that has suffered, and they've been trying to revitalize it for many years, but unfortunately, a lot of criminal activity still happens there.
There's a lot of drug abuse. There's a lot of panhandling, poverty. Socioeconomic status is pretty low.
There's a lot of homicides in Allison Hill. You go there and neighbors are worried about their neighborhood.
And for one Allison Hill resident, this afternoon brings a new worry. It's a little after noon when Iris Belcher's brother notices smoke coming from the home across the street where his sister Iris lives.
He was really concerned about his sister.
Rushing over, he's met outside by Iris's boyfriend, Tyshant Love.
Where's Iris? She's upstairs.
As soon as that happened, he told the brother that something was wrong with Iris. And he took the brother into the house.
She's upstairs. It's bad.
Come on.
He said he came home and found something burning on the stove.
There was blood downstairs in the kitchen, and there was blood spatter going upstairs.
And when he followed the blood upstairs, he found Iris.
She was on the floor, laid down.
She was shot twice in her face.
At first glance, 20-year-old Iris Bennell Belcher appeared to have a bright future ahead of her.
She was a beautiful young woman, very intelligent young woman.
Iris had a really bubbly personality. She was just immediately likable. Everyone that came into contact with her really liked her. And she seemed to have so much potential.
But she'd also faced plenty of obstacles in her short life.
The environment she grew up in was extremely difficult.
It's difficult when there's a lot of drug trade to persevere through all of the outside influences that may bring you down.
And an unexpected pregnancy at age 15 didn't help.
Having a child at an early age is quite stressful.
That's a lot of balls to juggle.
If you don't have any help or any support, that alone can be extremely stressful or anxiety-provoking. How can you take care of yourself and take care of a child?
With few options to support herself, after Iris moved out on her own, she turned to drug dealing.
How Iris grew up explains a lot of why she entered the drug business.
Sometimes when people grow up in crime areas, it is ingrained in them.
It's just a twisted system. If you're coming up in that system, and you're trying to say, I want to better myself, how do you get money?
Unfortunately, we don't live in a society where everyone has an equal opportunity to make a great life for themselves. And sometimes people do feel that the only option they have is to deal drugs or engage in some other illegal activity.
That's what she knew, and she was comfortable around it.
She was also good at it.
She was extremely intelligent, so it was easy for her to pick it up and make money doing it and support herself and her daughter.
She became really well known within the drug community and successful.
And she soon fell in with a group of dealers based out of New York City.
We had a lot of individuals coming down from New York City and selling drugs here because it was so lucrative. The drugs could be sold for so much more money, and they kept their contacts in New York, and then they would come down here and sell the drugs for more money and make a profit.
One of those New York drug dealers was Tyshant Love.
He was known as the professor. He had a studious air about him.
I never understood the relationship. It was one of those relationships where you look and you go, I don't get it. But she was in that drug life. He was in that drug life. They had lots in common.
But what really brought them together was the way Tyshant treated Iris's daughter.
Hey, man. Oh, no, she sleep already?
Yeah, I just got her down.
I got this for her, though.
As a single mother, when the person that is now in the picture and is accepting of the child that you had before them, it does bring a sense of hope and a sense of family.
Well, you stay the night, right?
I mean, yeah, I could just give it to her tomorrow.
Okay, sounds good.
That's where the connection became strong.
Oh, I love the way that sounds.
The thought of becoming a family also sparked a change in Iris.
She wanted to better her life.
She was trying to get out of the drug trade and do something better for her family. One of the ways you do that is by education.
She had been accepted into the nursing program at Harrisburg Area Community College.
She really set her sights on a new life.
But now it appears that Iris's new life has come to a sudden, violent end.
After seeing smoke coming from her house, Iris's brother goes across the street to investigate.
He approached the property and he saw Tyshant come out. He was very panicked.
Yo, where's Iris? She's upstairs. She's back.
He took the brother into the house. They found Iris.
She was found in the bedroom with gunshot wounds.
Tyshant told her brother, "You call 911.
Call 911. Call 911.
And then he left the scene.
Iris, wake up, Iris. Where you going?
To make ends meet, single mother Iris Fennell Belcher was turning her life around.
She wanted more for her life and for her daughter. She decided she wanted out of the game, and she applied and got accepted to nursing school.
But now it's Iris who's in desperate need of medical attention.
Her boyfriend Tyshant and her brother have just found Iris on her bedroom floor.
She was found in the bedroom with gunshot wounds.
And then, after telling Iris's brother to call 911, Tyshant had run out the door.
I'll be back. I'll be right back. I'll be right back.
Tyshant said something along the lines of, "I know what happened, and I'm going to go take care of it."
Within minutes, sirens converge on the neighborhood.
It's chaotic. There's a lot of police that show up.
They enter the house with guns drawn.
Hurry! She's right here!
The first thing the officer has to do in a situation like this is actually clear the house.
But all they find is Iris's body on the bedroom floor.
She had two very close contact wounds, one going to the front of her mouth and one that went through her cheeks.
And given her past, the victim is well known to the police.
DOA on the scene, 20-year-old female, Iris Belcher, send major crimes to the location.
I knew her, and I actually kind of liked her.
In this profession, you learn to hate the crime and not the person.
The detectives work quickly to try and determine what happened.
When we do an investigation for a homicide, we start at the body.
And the way she was killed, 2 close-range shots to the face. It seems significant.
That gives a very personal feeling to it, perhaps indicating that the killer was someone that she knew.
Although, given the world she moved in, that doesn't rule out a drug-related murder.
Maybe it was a rival dealer or an associate that double-crossed her.
You don't see too many random killings. It's usually drug deal gone bad or, some kind of criminal activity. Tensions can certainly flare up as a result of that.
However, there are also signs that suggest a different motive.
Her legs were spread and her genitalia was exposed.
The concern was that there was a sexual assault that took place.
There were signs of a struggle. There was some furniture knocked over.
Let's check downstairs.
While the killer's motive is unclear, it's easy to see how the deadly attack progressed.
Whatever was going on started in the kitchen.
There was burnt food, which means that an attack possibly happened in the middle of getting ready for a meal.
Then, based on the blood trail, it appears Iris's attacker dragged her upstairs.
The detectives find a clump of hair on the stairs.
They thought perhaps there was an altercation that happened on the stairs.
And perhaps most tragic of all, there's a Christmas tree in the living room with gifts underneath.
I'm sure she wanted to spend Christmas with her family, and to have her life tragically cut short 5 days before Christmas was gut-wrenching.
Just as gut-wrenching as the task of telling Iris's brother that his sister is dead.
He is devastated by this loss.
And like the police, he suspects that her death could be drug-related.
I kept telling her she's gonna get herself killed.
Iris's family really pleaded with her to leave the drug dealing. They were concerned for her safety.
And the message had finally gotten through.
Iris was trying to better her life by enrolling in nursing school.
I really thought she was gonna make it out.
Whenever you have somebody who's a drug dealer and they decide to get out, you root for them. It's like the underdog, and you want them to succeed.
Instead, it looked as if Iris's turnaround had been too little, too late.
So you came over and found her?
No, it was Tyshawn, her boyfriend.
Speaking with Iris's brother, the police learned that Tyshawn was at the scene, but he left shortly thereafter.
Did he say why?
He just said he wanted to get whoever did this.
So he knew who it was?
That's what he said.
The family knew she and Tyshawn were both involved in drugs, and that possibly this could have something to do with that.
However, it's not the only possibility they have to consider.
A lot of acts of violence originate from some sort of domestic altercation between romantic partners.
And since Tyshawn was allegedly the person that found her, the detectives are going to have to rule him out.
The detectives make finding Tyshawn their first priority.
Dispatch. I need a bolo on Tyshawn Love.
They issued a bolo, and he was found pretty quickly.
Tyshawn Love was brought to the police department to be interviewed.
When questioned by the detectives, Tyshawn says that Iris had been home alone the night before her murder.
Where were you? I went out.
Tyshawn tells detectives that he went to a bar.
And Iris's daughter was spending the night at her mother's house.
She had been spending a lot of time with her mom because of Iris's lifestyle.
Her mom? She didn't really like what we've been doing. Selling drugs.
After the bar, Tyshant said he'd gone to a friend's place.
He said he crashed there for a few hours.
You went back to the house?
Mm-hmm.
He said that he returned home and found her body.
And he says that as soon as he saw Iris dead on the floor, he knew who did it.
Who? Lamar. Lamar Peterson. Yeah, that's him.
I knew Lamar Peterson.
He loomed large in the drug community.
And it's not hard for the detective to believe that he's their killer.
He has a very troubled past, a lot of sexual assault.
There are some people in this world that I can't say anything else. They perpetrate evil.
Love has just told detectives investigating the murder of his girlfriend, Iris Fennell Belcher, that he knows who did it.
Lamar.
He said it was a fellow drug dealer named Lamar Peterson.
Lamar and Tyshant were associates from the group of New York drug dealers, but I also knew that he was very violent.
And Lamar's reputation seems like a match to Iris's murderer.
Lamar Peterson was a violent sexual offender and was a suspect in a very violent sexual assault attempted homicide in Harrisburg.
According to Tyshant, he'd also been staying with them.
You knew y'all been looking for him on that rape thing, and he wanted to stay with us for a little while until things cooled off.
Lamar was somebody that if you wanted to stay someplace, you really didn't reject him.
You don't argue with Lamar. When he says jump, you just ask how high.
He was an individual that I didn't want to confront unless I had the manpower around me to confront him.
But according to Tyshant, Iris wasn't intimidated by Lamar.
Apparently, Iris was really upset with Lamar staying there.
She just did not feel comfortable with him there, especially with their daughter.
And she did not bite her tongue in making it known her disdain towards him because of some acts he had allegedly committed.
There had been arguments between Tyshant and Iris about Lamar.
And Tyshant says that when he hesitated to kick Lamar out, Iris took matters into her own hands.
She confronted him. They had an altercation and she was really upset. She told me he had to leave.
She ever threatened him? Yeah.
She said if he didn't go, she'd tell the police where he was. Basically turning him in for rape, which gave him no other choice but to leave.
So, according to Tyshant, Lamar had packed his things and left. But had he come back?
Tyshant says if someone hurt Iris, it was definitely Lamar.
People didn't tell him no. There was a definite amount of respect for him.
And killing Iris may have been a way for him to save face.
And the crime appears to have Lamar's M.O. written all over it.
She had no clothing from her waist down.
And Lamar had a history of sexual assaults.
They think that possibly Iris could be one of Lamar's victims.
But while the police consider Lamar a possible suspect, they aren't ready to let Tyshant off the hook just yet.
And how are things between you and Iris lately? Honestly, not so great.
Tyshant tells detectives they have the same argument a lot. Iris wants better for herself and she wants out of the game. But he likes things the way they are and doesn't want to change.
When you have conflicting views and conflicting desires or purposes in life, it does bring tension to the relationship.
And Tyshant admits that last night, things got so tense, he had to get out of the house.
According to Tyshant, that's why he'd gone to the bar.
He went just to get away from the situation.
But he says that Iris showed up at the same spot just a few hours later.
Tyshant became enraged. This was opposite of everything that she said. She said she wanted to stay home, but here she was at a bar. They really got into a fight. He stormed off, but when he looked back, Iris was gone.
After that, Tyshant says he stayed at the bar to drown his sorrows.
There was a woman there, Vanessa Ortiz. They were talking, they hit it off, and she eventually invited him back to her place.
And that's where you spent the night? Yeah, but ain't nothing happened.
Tyshant says they just stayed on the couch and watched a movie. But he woke up the next morning and he felt incredibly guilty.
And at a little before noon, he'd headed home.
he went to go smooth things over with Iris. But when he walked into the bedroom, he saw this heinous crime.
And you had nothing to do with this?
No, sir.
He said that he loved Iris and he would never do that to her.
And when police track down Vanessa Ortiz, it seems Tyshant is telling the truth.
We found out that she was with Tyshawn Love that night. Tyshawn and Vanessa had met in a bar, and she said they then went back to her house to spend the night.
While the detectives spend the next 48 hours searching for Lamar, the news of Iris's murder spreads across the city.
In the mid-90s, there was no social media presence, really. There weren't cell phones like there are today, so people would get their paper in the morning and they would watch the nightly news to see what happened.
And the details about Iris's death struck a chord with people.
There are homicides that occur in the city where not even the news picks up on them. But Iris was not that kind of homicide. It was one of those that affected a lot of people.
So there's a lot of pressure to solve this murder.
And once the detectives track down Lamar, it looks like they're on the right track.
They bring Lamar in and they realize something very interesting.
We saw that there was blood on his boots.
Detectives investigating Iris Belcher's murder have brought notorious drug dealer Lamar Peterson in for questioning.
Iris's boyfriend Tyshant had previously told detectives that he believes Lamar killed Iris.
Lamar Peterson. Yeah, that's him.
And as soon as the detectives sit down with Lamar, they suspect Tyshant may be right.
On his shoes, there's a splatter of blood. Also, he has a history of sexual assault, and Iris was found in a compromised manner that looks like it could be sexual assault.
You start to put two and two together and say, okay, is this going to come out to 4?
When the detectives ask Lamar about Iris's murder, he denies any involvement.
Lamar says despite his troubled past, it was not him, and he had nothing to do with her murder.
She didn't threaten to turn you in?
Man, she always saying stuff like that.
Detectives try to press him further, but Lamar remains silent.
He refuses to give them any more information.
But they may not need him to.
We noticed blood on your boot.
Any idea how that got there?
Lamar wouldn't talk, but because we saw that there was blood on those boots, we were able to take the boots of Lamar and we sent him to the Pennsylvania Police Lab.
After collecting his boots, detectives take Lamar into custody, but not for murder.
They hold him on the sexual assault charge that Iris supposedly threatened to turn him in on.
But detectives are still waiting for the DNA results when they get Iris's autopsy report.
The autopsy determined that she had been shot twice at extremely close range.
The first one was through the cheeks. That probably wouldn't have killed her.
Defensive wounds were indicated on her body.
She was fighting back.
And then she was killed with the one to the mouth.
However, there is one surprise in the report.
They determined there was no sexual assault.
So it's very puzzling.
Still, when the detectives get the DNA results on Lamar's boots back from the lab, they appear to be more than enough to seal his fate.
The blood that was on that boots was Iris's.
But before they charge Lamar with murder, the detectives get an unexpected tip about Vanessa Ortiz, the young woman who was Tyshant's alibi.
According to a tipster, Vanessa had been bragging to her friends about seeing the murder take place. And Tyshant had her hidden in a hotel so the police could not further question her.
The detectives rush to the hotel and bring Vanessa in for questioning.
She says she did spend the night with Tyshant.
But she also tells detectives that his alibi is fake.
She said Tyshant Love is the murderer.
Okay, so how do you know that?
Because I was there.
Vanessa tells detectives that on the morning after Tyshant spent the night, she accompanied him back to his place.
They saw Iris cooking breakfast, and Iris was really upset that there was another woman in her home.
Who is she?
None of your business.
She and Tyshant got into an altercation, and it became physical quickly.
What you mean none of my business? This is my house.
No, this is my house.
This is our house.
No, it's not. I pay bills here. I'm the man here.
At some point during this argument, he pulled a gun out from under the stove.
Where I'm going now, huh?
Okay, so you saw him shoot her?
No.
Vanessa claims that Tyshant pistol whipped her.
He grabbed her by her hair, dragged her upstairs.
And then Vanessa heard gunshots coming from upstairs.
She knew that Tyshant had shot Iris twice.
So you didn't actually see him do it?
No.
Then, according to Vanessa, Tyshant came back downstairs and they left.
If anybody asks, I was with you last night and today. Got it? Come on.
He was desperate. He needed an alibi because he knew everything was going to point towards him, and he used her. That was just an act of desperation because a young girl like that is the last person he should have used as an alibi.
Then, after stashing Vanessa at a hotel, detectives suspect he went back home to stage the scene to further distance himself from the crime.
He went back and took off Iris's pants.
And then he pointed the finger at Lamar.
Do you have any idea who would do this?
Lamar.
Tyshant was trying to ride the Lamar Peterson wave of violence, saying that Iris was just another one of his victims.
But there was a weak link in his plan. Vanessa.
This was overwhelming to her. There was no way she was going to hold that secret forever. There was no way she could do it.
And her story matches the physical evidence at the scene.
Vanessa's eyewitness account is enough for the detectives to take Tyshant into custody.
We were able to get an arrest warrant.
But he continues to stick to his story.
His account was Lamar Peterson did this.
Which means there's a lot riding on Vanessa.
The government was heavily relying on her statements in order to convict Mr. Love.
And as the case moved towards trial, the prosecutors suddenly had a big problem.
Vanessa would not cooperate anymore.
As prosecutors prepare to put Iris Belcher's boyfriend, Tyshant Love, on trial for murder, the case collapses when their star witness, Vanessa Ortiz, suddenly stops cooperating.
She got subpoenaed to the courtroom multiple times, and she was not showing up.
She had seen what happened to Iris, and she was terrified that it was going to happen to her, and she didn't want to talk.
And without her testimony, the prosecution has no case.
When it went to the prelim, the charges were dropped because Vanessa wouldn't testify.
He becomes free again until such time that the government decides to refile the charges.
This news hits Iris's mother particularly hard.
She believed that it was Tyshant who murdered her daughter, and it had to be gut-wrenching for her. It is just the worst thing ever. I mean, it's just, I can only imagine what she was going through.
When families are not able to have justice, it leaves them in a lot of emotionally distress.
But even though they've dropped the charges, Tyshant is never entirely off the detectives' radar.
When it comes to the crime of murder, there is no statute of limitations in Pennsylvania, and so those charges can always be refiled at a date in the future.
Over time, is it that easy? No, it's not that easy.
It was assigned to other detectives. They weren't able to make headway.
But you still don't ever give up, especially if you believe that this case can eventually lead to something.
Eventually, the case ends up on the desk of Detective Donald Hefner.
I was working several homicides at the time. A couple of them were cold cases, but I felt that this was a case that could be solved. And I decided to put my efforts into it.
Sometimes you need another set of eyes to look at something from another point of view.
Even if that means starting over from the beginning.
I spoke to everybody I could. I mean, in these kind of cases, that's what you do. You kind of flip over every rock you can find to see what's underneath. And a lot of it is nothing, but sometimes it's something.
After some digging, Detective Hefner develops a sense of just how tumultuous Iris and Tyshant's relationship had been.
Your relationship was pretty toxic.
He was painted as jealous.
Friends also said he was abusive.
On the outside, it looked like Iris and Tyshant had a great relationship. On the inside, it wasn't so great. There was a lot of arguing, a lot of fighting, which led to sometimes physical altercations.
As time goes on, the brutality increases.
Until Iris had reached her limit.
I learned that she had told friends that she wanted to leave him.
And since she was his connection into Harrisburg's drug world, Tyshant couldn't have that.
Iris brought him up in the social life, and without her, he was nothing.
But that's not enough to file new charges. There's still one loose end that needs tying up. Lamar Peterson.
We knew there was a problem with the case because of the blood on his boots and because of his violent behavior.
And if Tyshant even went to trial for the murder, defense was sure to use Lamar to raise reasonable doubt.
What we couldn't verify is when that blood got on the boots. We don't know if there was another fight. We don't know if he was there when the gunshot occurred. We just don't know.
And Lamar, by this time in prison for an unrelated crime, refused to say.
I tried to close that loop, but Lamar wouldn't talk to me.
Which once again means everything is riding on Vanessa Ortiz.
Vanessa was the key.
Will she talk now that some time has passed?
I said to myself that there's a possibility that she is mature enough to talk about this, because I'm sure this has not left her alone.
And since Vanessa has become a mother in the interim, there may be a way to reach her.
You know Iris had a daughter, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes the empathetic side kicks in, and it's just messed up. This little girl has no mom. And I have information that can find this little girl some closure.
She began opening up to me, and she started to relay details of what happened at that house.
She also changes her story.
She now says that she has seen Tyshant shoot Iris.
To get Vanessa to finally open up was a big step in trying to solve this homicide.
In September of 2001, 5 years after Iris's murder, police arrest Tyshant for a second time. But once again, as the trial date approaches, the prosecutors are faced with a problem.
Vanessa is nowhere to be found.
Only this time, they're prepared.
They recorded her testimony, and they could use it in court.
Shortly before Tyshant Love is scheduled to finally stand trial for the murder of Iris Fennell Belcher, the prosecution's star witness disappears a second time.
When Vanessa refused to cooperate, the first time that Tyshant was supposed to stand trial, the prosecutors had been forced to drop the charges.
Without her testimony, there was no way to bound the case over to trial. So the case had to be dismissed.
But this time, the detectives and prosecutors are ready.
They have recorded her sworn statement.
And since it was all under oath, The prosecutors are able to use it in court when Tyshant finally stands trial in September of 2005.
Homicide happened in 1996, so it took 9 years for prosecutors to feel like they had enough evidence to take it to trial.
In their open, the prosecutors portray Tyshant as a vengeful boyfriend who refused to accept the end of a relationship.
Iris was getting ready to leave him. She was enrolled in school. She was trying to turn over a new leaf, and she was trying to leave the drug life behind.
She was also trying to leave her abusive boyfriend behind.
When people who have experienced domestic violence are trying to get out, those are the most dangerous times.
And when Tyshant brought Vanessa to the home on the morning of the murder and an argument ensued, Tyshant's anger boiled over into rage.
The gunshot wounds to the mouth, to me, indicated, shut your mouth.
But there was no way for Tyshant to shut Vanessa up.
Her recorded testimony was the key to the prosecution's case.
They had fun the night before. You come home with a person and you witness a murder. I can't imagine that depth of trauma that could have been for her.
Still, as powerful as Vanessa's recorded statement is, the defense also has some cards to play.
There's always going to be that thought that Lamar Peterson played a part in this homicide.
The fact that there were traces of Ms. Belcher's blood on Mr. Peterson's shoe signals to the jury, hey, there could be someone else who committed this crime.
And the prosecution never came up with a compelling explanation for how Iris's blood ended up on Lamar's boot.
I honestly think that Lamar Peterson was a witness to the violence. And because he was such a violent man, he just didn't care. So he saw what happened, and he was fine with it.
But will questions about Lamar be enough for Tyshant's acquittal?
When a verdict is read, the jury finds him guilty of third-degree murder.
In Pennsylvania, first-degree murder requires an intentional killing. There has to be premeditation. A second-degree murder, there is an underlying felony. And then third-degree murder, it's pretty much a killing with malice.
The judge sentences Tyshant to 30 years in prison.
The system did punish Tyshant for his violence and for taking another life, and we got closure for the family. Unfortunately, when you have these kind of homicides, or when you have a homicide investigation, we don't have justice. We have closure. In order to have justice, I have to make you kind of whole again. I can't do that. I can't bring that person back.
However, Iris's memory lives on in her daughter, now an adult with a family of her own.
To live with every day knowing that your mother was taken from you before you even had a chance to get to know her, I can only imagine what impact that's had on her.
You can adapt to it. You can learn to live with it. You can't forget it.
Despite that, Iris's daughter has created a rich life for herself.
She also realized her mom's dream, and she became a nurse.
And in that way, Iris's legacy lives on.
I remember her family talking about her as somebody who had a lot of dreams and aspirations. She had planned to better her life for herself and her child, and she was well on her way to that when her life was tragically cut short.
It was the autumn of 1976 when the quiet, tree-lined suburban avenues of South Boston were shattered by an unnatural, suffocating silence. A tragedy struck at the very core of a tight-knit community, a place where working-class families locked their doors only out of habit, where neighbors knew every face on the block, and where high school sports were the sacred, beating pulse of Friday nights. In the crisp, fading light of a late October afternoon, 15-year-old Timmy Vance walked off the practice field, zipped up his faded varsity jacket, waved goodbye to his teammates, and stepped onto the gravel path leading toward the local park. He was heading home for dinner, just 5 blocks away. He never made it past the 3rd block. He vanished without a trace, leaving behind only an overturned bicycle, a dropped leather glove, and a terrifying mystery that would freeze the blood of a city for half a century. For 48 hours, the local precinct treated the vanishing as a routine runaway case. Timothy was a quiet kid, an honor student, a star midfielder on the youth soccer team, hardly the profile of a teenager looking to leave his life behind. But as day 3 bled into day 4 with no ransom demand, no sighting, and no phone calls, the dreadful realization set in. Something sinister had swallowed Timmy Vance whole. Volunteers swept through the dense woods of Stony Brook Reservation. Scuba divers dragged the murky depths of the Neponset River. Helicopters whipped through the gray autumn sky with searchlights scanning overgrown alleyways and abandoned rail yards. Yet, every lead dead-ended in a wall of stone-cold silence. The community was paralyzed by fear. Parents held their children tight behind bolted doors, whispering in dark kitchens about the shadow lurking on their streets, while the local headlines screamed in bold, relentless ink. Missing boy shatters neighborhood safety. Police hunt for phantom kidnapper. As weeks turned into months, the investigation degenerated into a maze of dead ends, blind alleys, and agonizing speculation. Detectives interrogated dozens of persons of interest, from neighborhood drifters to out-of-town delivery drivers, but every suspect provided an airtight alibi or failed to yield a shred of physical evidence. The crime scene, if the lonely stretch of gravel near the park could even be called that, had been thoroughly washed clean by a torrential rainstorm on the night of the disappearance. No fingerprints, no footprints, no witnesses coming forward with a credible story. The file was eventually closed, stamped with the tragic, haunting label that strikes terror into the heart of every detective: cold case. For nearly 50 years, the photograph of Timmy Vance, smiling innocently in his athletic jersey, hung on the yellowed bulletin board of the Boston Police Department's Unsolved Homicide Division, a silent indictment of a justice system that had failed him. Decades passed, and the world moved on. Generations grew up, aged, and passed away, carrying the lingering trauma of October 1976 in their hearts. The neighborhood transformed, glass high-rises replaced old brick tenements, and the terrifying disappearance of Timmy Vance faded into local urban legend, a dark bedtime story told to keep children from wandering into the park after dark. But beneath the surface of the city, hidden deep within a high-security evidence vault in downtown Boston, a small, dusty cardboard box lay waiting. Inside that box sat the forgotten remnants of a forgotten crime: Timmy's recovered leather glove, his soil-stained jersey, and a tiny, preserved trace of biological material scraped from the bicycle frame during the initial 1976 canvass. Evidence harvested long before the discovery of DNA profiling, long before the advent of modern forensic genetics. Then came the breakthrough that would send seismic shockwaves through the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. In early 2026, a specialized cold case unit equipped with cutting-edge touch DNA extraction techniques and advanced genealogical mapping reopened the Vance file. Forensic technicians meticulously harvested microscopic epithelial cells trapped deep within the fibers of the leather glove. What they found was an pristine, unbroken male DNA profile. When uploaded into national genealogical databases, the genetic trail didn't lead to a shadowy transient or an escaped convict. It led straight to the heart of the community's most beloved, revered, and untouchable figures. The headline sent shockwaves across the nation. Boston 1976 cold case solved. Respected coach taken into custody. The man led away in handcuffs by federal agents and state troopers was 82-year-old Arthur "Coach" Artie Pendleton. To the people of Boston, Pendleton was a living legend, a retired championship high school coach, a recipient of the Mayor's Medal of Honor for youth mentorship, and a man who had spent 5 decades molding generations of young athletes into pillar citizens. He was the very man who had organized the initial search parties for Timmy Vance in 1976. He had stood alongside the grieving parents on national television, wiping tears from his eyes, pleading for the killer to come forward. For half a century, the predator had hidden in plain sight, wrapped in the protective armor of community reverence, civic honors, and absolute trust. Now, as storm clouds gather over the federal courthouse in Boston, the terrifying truth is finally forced into the light of day. The nightmare that began on a chilly October afternoon in 1976 is no longer an unsolved mystery. The monster who walked among them has been unmasked, and the full, horrifying narrative of betrayal, deception, and ultimate justice is about to be laid bare. The arrest of Arthur, Coach Artie, Pendleton reverberated through the streets of Boston like an artillery blast in the dead of night. Front-page headlines splashed his smiling, silver-haired portrait alongside yellowed police mugshots from a forgotten era, leaving a city in absolute, breathtaking shock. How could a man who spent 50 years building athletic programs, accepting civic awards, and comforting grieving families be the very monster who tore a 15-year-old boy from the fabric of reality? Journalists swarmed the quiet, oak-shaded cul-de-sac in suburban Quincy, where Pendleton had lived out his comfortable retirement, while neighbors stood on their manicured lawns in stunned, horror-stricken silence. The man who hosted annual summer barbecues for youth leagues, the man who sat in the front pew of St. Mary's Church every Sunday morning, was hauled away in steel shackles, his head bowed, his face emotionless, as federal agents carried box after box of sealed evidence out of his basement vault. To understand the sheer magnitude of this betrayal, one must travel back to the late autumn of 1976, when the atmosphere in South Boston was thick with paranoia and grief. The initial discovery of Timmy Vance's abandoned bicycle had offered detectives their first, agonizing look into a crime scene that raised more questions than answers. The metallic blue 10-speed bike lay tossed in the high grass along the perimeter of the Stony Brook Reservation, its back wheel still spinning slowly when a dog walker stumbled upon it at 5:45 p.m. Just 3 yards away lay a single, dark brown leather glove, saturated with cold rain, and a soil-stained varsity jacket. There were no drag marks in the mud, no tire tracks from a getaway vehicle, and no signs of a violent struggle. It was as if Timmy had simply stepped off his pedals, dropped his belongings, and vanished into thin air. In those crucial early hours, the investigation was headed by Chief Inspector Thomas, Iron Tom Callahan, a battle-hardened homicide veteran who knew every dark corner of the neighborhood. Callahan immediately established a command post at the local precinct, mobilizing over 50 uniformed officers to execute a door-to-door canvass. The hypothesis was simple. A teenage boy on a familiar path does not willingly abandon his bicycle unless he is confronted by overwhelming force, or unless he recognizes and trusts the person calling out to him from the shadows. Detectives questioned every shopkeeper, every bus driver, and every resident along the 5-block radius between the practice field and Timmy's home. Yet, despite the wall-to-wall police presence, not a single witness reported seeing a suspicious vehicle or hearing a cry for help. Enter Arthur Pendleton. At 32 years old, Coach Artie was already a towering, beloved figure in the local sports scene. Energetic, charismatic, and deeply invested in the lives of his players, Pendleton was the head youth athletics director who had personally coached Timmy Vance since the boy was 10 years old. Within hours of the boy's disappearance, Pendleton positioned himself as the undisputed leader of the community's response. He organized volunteer search grids, set up a donation drive for the family, and served as the unofficial spokesman for the neighborhood in front of news cameras. He was at the precinct office every morning bringing coffee to the investigators, asking for updates, and subtly inquiring about which leads the police were pursuing. To Callahan and his team, Pendleton was an indispensable asset, a grieving mentor pouring his heart and soul into finding his lost star athlete. Behind closed doors, however, the initial investigation was quietly fracturing under the weight of political pressure and conflicting theories. While Inspector Callahan suspected an opportunistic outsider who had scouted the park's isolated gravel path, junior detectives raised unsettling questions about the timeline. Timmy's last known contact had been at 5:10 p.m. on the practice field, where he was seen talking to a man standing near the equipment shed. That man was wearing a dark windbreaker, the standard issue gear worn by the coaching staff. When questioned in 1976, Pendleton readily admitted to speaking with Timmy, claiming he had merely reminded the teenager about the upcoming weekend game before driving off to an athletic board meeting downtown. Pendleton's alibi was promptly corroborated by two fellow board members who confirmed his arrival at the meeting by 5:45 p.m. With an airtight timeline and a flawless reputation, Pendleton was instantly cleared, taking him off the suspect board before the ink on the initial police report was even dry. For decades, that crucial 10-minute window between 5:10 p.m. and 5:20 p.m. remained the ultimate enigma of the Vance case. How could anyone lure a street-smart 15-year-old off his bike, subdue him without a sound, and transport him away from a public park in broad daylight within a window of less than 6 minutes? The answer lay buried in the limitations of 1970s technology and the blinding power of absolute trust. Timmy Vance didn't fight back because he wasn't facing a stranger in the dark. He was looking at his mentor, a trusted authority figure offering him a quick ride or asking for help with sports equipment stored in the back of a personal station wagon. As the years rolled on, the silence surrounding Stony Brook Reservation grew heavier. Timmy's parents, exhausted by decades of false leads and crushed hopes, passed away without ever knowing what became of their youngest son. The neighborhood changed, the precinct files gathered dust, and Inspector Callahan retired with the unsolved file sitting on his desk, a haunting reminder of the one case he could never close. Meanwhile, Arthur Pendleton flourished. He went on to lead his high school teams to 7 state championships, earned a master's degree in educational administration, and retired in the early 2000s as one of the most decorated youth mentors in Massachusetts history. He gave speeches on youth safety, established sports scholarships in Timmy Vance's memory, and sat comfortably on local charity boards, a wolf living peacefully in the center of the flock he had preyed upon. The illusion of safety finally shattered in the spring of 2026 when the Boston Police Department's newly restructured cold case unit decided to perform a comprehensive audit of all unsequenced biological evidence stored in the state's deep archive facilities. Among the thousands of evidence bags was Item 76B, the single leather glove found near Timmy Vance's abandoned bicycle. Back in 1976, the glove had been tested for fingerprints, yielding negative results. But modern forensic science does not look for oil prints. It looks for the invisible, immortal trail of human DNA. Utilizing advanced MVAC vacuum extraction technology, forensic geneticists pulled microscopic skin cells trapped deep within the interior seams and the exterior wrist clasp of the leather glove. The resulting profile was uploaded into advanced forensic genealogical databases. Within 72 hours, the system lit up with a partial family match, pointing directly to a prominent family branch in Norfolk County. When investigators built out the family tree and cross-referenced the names against the original 1976 police witness list, one name stood out in bold, terrifying clarity: Arthur Pendleton. The discovery sent shockwaves through the district attorney's office. Detectives immediately placed Pendleton under 24-hour covert surveillance while obtaining a warrant for a surreptitious DNA sample. Investigators followed the 82-year-old retired coach to a local coffee shop, recovering a discarded paper cup from a trash receptacle. The match was absolute, undeniable, and statistically definitive, a 1 in 10-billion genetic match connecting Coach Artie to the physical evidence recovered from the scene of Timmy Vance's disappearance. The 50-year-old lie was finally over. The respected community leader, the champion coach, the grieving mentor who had walked alongside the police in 1976, was placed in steel handcuffs. As he was led down the courthouse steps, surrounded by flashing cameras and furious screams from a shocked public, Pendleton maintained his cold, stoic silence. But for the cold case investigators who had spent decades chasing a ghost, the arrest was only the beginning. The unmasking of Coach Artie opened the floodgates to a much darker, much more expansive nightmare, one that threatens to uncover secrets buried deep beneath the surface of New York and New England for half a century. The swift arrest of Arthur, Coach Artie, Pendleton tore open a dam of suppressed memories, buried rumors, and decades-old police reports that had sat gathering dust in the archives of Massachusetts law enforcement. As news of the 82-year-old's capture dominated national broadcasts, the initial shock in South Boston rapidly turned into a toxic compound of rage, betrayal, and profound horror. People who had grown up under Pendleton's tutelage, men who had trusted him with their teenage years, were suddenly forced to re-examine their pasts through a dark, terrifying lens. The man who had been handed the keys to the city's youth programs had spent 5 decades hiding behind a carefully crafted shield of civic heroism, while the cold truth of what happened on October 28, 1976, lay waiting to be dragged into the light. In the sub-basement of the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, a special task force comprised of veteran homicide detectives, FBI forensic behavioral analysts, and cold case investigators convened behind locked doors. Their objective was no longer just securing an indictment for the murder of 15-year-old Timmy Vance. It was piecing together the full, horrifying scope of Pendleton's movements during the autumn of 1976. When investigators executed a multi-point search warrant on Pendleton's sprawling, 2-story home in Quincy, what they found confirmed their worst fears. Tucked behind a false wall in his basement workshop, hidden behind stacks of championship trophies and framed newspaper clippings, was a heavy steel fireproof safe. Inside lay a meticulous, sickening archive of the past 50 years. Dozens of labeled cassette tapes, small personal effects, school athletic rosters with handwritten symbols beside certain names, and detailed journals written in a cryptic, alphanumeric shorthand. Among the items recovered from the safe was a small, tarnished silver ring bearing the initials TV. It was the class ring Timmy Vance's parents had saved up for months to buy him for his 15th birthday, a ring Timmy was wearing on the day he disappeared. When forensic technicians confirmed the presence of dried blood traces inside the inner band of the ring, any remaining sliver of doubt vanished. Arthur Pendleton had not only taken Timmy Vance's life, he had kept a physical trophy of his crime stored beneath his floorboards for half a century, returning to it while living out his lauded, comfortable retirement. As behavioral analysts deciphered Pendleton's encrypted journals, a terrifying operational pattern began to emerge. In 1976, Pendleton's position as head youth athletics director provided him with unbridled, unquestioned access to vulnerable teenagers across the greater Boston area. He knew who was walking home alone, whose parents worked late shifts, and who looked up to him for guidance. On that chilly October afternoon, Pendleton had intentionally scheduled an impromptu post-practice meeting with Timmy. He knew the precise route the boy would take through Stony Brook Reservation. Utilizing his status as a beloved authority figure, Pendleton pulled his tan station wagon onto the gravel maintenance road bordering the park, flagged Timmy down under the pretense of handing him forgotten sports gear, and convinced the boy to leave his bike in the brush for just a moment. The physical evidence suggested that once Timmy approached the vehicle, Pendleton struck with calculated, devastating speed. Using an incapacitating chemical agent or a blunt instrument, he overpowered the teenager before Timmy could let out a single scream or leave any signs of a struggle. Pendleton then placed the boy in the rear cargo area, drove out of the park through a forgotten municipal utility gate, and delivered him to a secondary location, a secluded cabin property Pendleton owned in the remote woods of the Berkshires. It was there, far beyond the reach of search dogs and police helicopters, that Timmy Vance met his tragic end. What horrified investigators most was the staggering level of calculated sociopathy Pendleton displayed in the days immediately following the murder. While state troopers were dragging the Neponset River and hundreds of volunteers were beating the brush in Stony Brook, Pendleton was actively directing the search grids away from his utility route. He sat in the Vance family living room, holding the hands of Timmy's sobbing mother, offering prayers, and bringing home-cooked meals to the family. On national television broadcasts, he looked directly into the camera lens with tears welling in his eyes, pleading for the captor to return the boy safely. He used his intimate knowledge of the police investigation, gained through his constant, helpful presence at the precinct command post, to monitor every lead, ensuring that detectives remained perpetually 3 steps behind him. The realization that Pendleton had manipulated the entire community caused a seismic wave of outrage to ripple through the legal system. Defense attorneys representing Pendleton attempted to mount an immediate legal wall, filing emergency motions to suppress the touch DNA evidence recovered from the leather glove, arguing that the passage of 50 years violated their client's right to a speedy trial and compromised the integrity of the evidence chain. They cited Pendleton's frail physical health, advanced age, and lack of any prior criminal record to petition for home confinement. However, the prosecution countered with overwhelming force, presenting the contents of the basement safe and demonstrating that Pendleton remained a severe threat to public safety and an extreme flight risk backed by undisclosed financial assets. The judge denied bail, ordering the former coach held in maximum security protective custody at the Plymouth County Correctional Facility. As news of the trove of evidence spread, police departments across New England began reopening their own cold case vaults from the 1970s, 1980s, and 1990s. The discovery of labeled cassettes and coded journals suggested that Timmy Vance was not an isolated incident, but rather the beginning of a decades-long dark legacy. Detectives in New Hampshire, Connecticut, and Rhode Island started cross-referencing regional missing persons files with Pendleton's coaching travel schedules, summer camp locations, and property deeds. The terrifying question hanging over the entire region was no longer just how Arthur Pendleton got away with murder in 1976. It was how many other lost children lay buried in the shadow of his 50-year lie. Back in South Boston, at the edge of the Stony Brook Reservation where an abandoned bicycle had once sparked a half-century of agonizing mystery, a spontaneous memorial began to take shape. Residents, former athletes, and relatives of missing persons from across the country laid hundreds of white lilies, candles, and handwritten notes beside the gravel path. The community had finally received the truth that had been denied for 5 decades, but the revelation brought no easy peace. The myth of neighborhood innocence was shattered forever. The people of Boston were left to confront the chilling reality that the ultimate monster was never a phantom lurking in the distant woods, but the man standing on the sidelines, cheering them on, and holding the whistle around his neck. The realization that Arthur Pendleton had kept an encrypted archive of his actions inside a basement safe changed the entire trajectory of the investigation. What began as a single breakthrough in a cold case from 1976 instantly expanded into one of the largest multi-jurisdictional task force operations in New England history. Investigators from federal law enforcement agencies, state police departments, and regional forensic labs converged on the FBI's regional field office in Boston. Their objective was clear: systematically decipher Pendleton's alphanumeric shorthand, catalog every item recovered from his property, and determine whether the tragic fate of Timmy Vance was an isolated act or part of a systemic, multi-decade campaign of violence. Codebreakers from the Quantico Cryptanalysis and Racketeering Records Unit worked around the clock to crack the cipher used in Pendleton's leather-bound journals. Within weeks, they unlocked the core structure of his record-keeping system. The journals were not private musings, they were a cold, clinical ledger. Pendleton had assigned a 3-digit numerical code to every town, athletic facility, and youth camp he had visited between 1968 and 2005. Beside these codes were dates, weather conditions, and specific initials accompanied by geometric symbols. A hollow circle denoted potential targets observed from afar, a cross circle indicated direct contact, and a filled black square marked dates where individuals disappeared without a trace. When forensic analysts overlaid Pendleton's encrypted ledger onto a regional map of unresolved missing persons cases, the results sent shockwaves through the law enforcement community. The black squares aligned with terrifying precision with unsolved disappearances across 3 states. In August 1981, during a regional track and field clinic in southern New Hampshire, a 14-year-old sprinter named Kevin Walsh vanished after stepping into a locker room. Pendleton's ledger contained a filled black square stamped with the same date and location code. In July 1989, while Pendleton was directing a summer athletic retreat in rural Vermont, a 16-year-old camp counselor named Marcus Brody disappeared during a night trail walk. Again, the ledger held the corresponding entry. As the full scope of Pendleton's double life began to surface, state police forensic teams expanded their search of his physical properties. Attention focused on his remote cabin in the Berkshires, a secluded, 3-acre parcel surrounded by dense pine forest near the Massachusetts-New York border. Heavy machinery, ground-penetrating radar units, and forensic archaeology teams were deployed to the location. For 3 agonizing weeks, the quiet woodland echoed with the sound of excavation equipment as technicians systematically scanned the soil. The physical search yielded terrifying validation. Hidden beneath the concrete floor of a detached wooden barn on the Berkshire property, ground-penetrating radar revealed structural anomalies. When forensic teams carefully jackhammered through the foundation, they uncovered a reinforced subterranean storage space. Inside, preserved in sealed containers alongside personal items, investigators recovered definitive physical evidence linked to multiple missing youth cases spanning 30 years. Among the items were school identification cards, athletic medals, and worn leather sports equipment, each tagged with meticulous, chilling precision. The discovery destroyed any legal defense strategy Arthur Pendleton's attorneys had attempted to assemble. The argument that Timmy Vance's death was an accidental injury covered up by a panicked young coach completely collapsed under the weight of organized, repeated, and premeditated criminal conduct. Faced with overwhelming physical evidence, DNA matches, and the recovery of victims' personal property, the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, in coordination with state prosecutors from New Hampshire and Vermont, prepared a comprehensive multi-count indictment charging Pendleton with multiple counts of aggravated kidnapping and first-degree murder. Yet, inside the high-security ward at the Plymouth County Correctional Facility, the 82-year-old former coach remained largely uncooperative. During initial interrogation sessions conducted by senior homicide detectives and FBI behavioral analysts, Pendleton sat motionless, staring blankly at the metal table, speaking only through his defense counsel. He offered no expressions of remorse, no explanations, and no assistance in identifying remaining evidence. His silence served as his final exercise of control over the narrative he had manipulated for half a century. Despite Pendleton's silence, the scientific evidence spoke with undeniable clarity. The touch DNA recovered from the leather glove in 1976, combined with the microscopic genetic material extracted from items found in his basement safe and Berkshire property, created an unbroken chain of forensic proof. The trial, set to take place at the John Adams Courthouse in Boston, promised to be one of the most significant legal proceedings in the history of the Commonwealth, a final, public accounting for a man who had used trust, authority, and civic prestige as a shield for unthinkable harm. In the neighborhoods of South Boston, the legal progress brought a complex mixture of relief and profound sorrow. For the surviving relatives of the victims, the unmasking of Coach Artie shattered decades of painful uncertainty, but it also forced them to confront the reality of how close the danger had been. The man who had sat at their dinner tables, organized memorial funds, and coached their surviving children was the very source of their lifelong grief. As the date for the preliminary hearings approached, the city stood united in its demand for justice, ready to witness the complete dismantling of a 50-year lie. Part 5. As the winter of 2026 set in over New England, the legal machinery surrounding the prosecution of Arthur "Coach" Artie Pendleton accelerated toward an inevitable, high-stakes showdown inside the John Adams Courthouse in downtown Boston. The Commonwealth's indictment, a towering document spanning dozens of counts across multiple jurisdictions, had transformed the case from a single cold case breakthrough into a landmark trial on systemic institutional betrayal and forensic accountability. Outside the courthouse steps, camera crews from major news networks established permanent broadcasting nests, while throngs of citizens, community members, and family members of victims gathered each morning under the gray winter sky, demanding a final, unyielding accounting for 50 years of deception. Inside Courtroom 7, the atmosphere was thick with tension as the preliminary evidentiary hearings commenced. The prosecution team, led by Assistant District Attorney Marcus Vance, a distant relative of Timmy Vance who had dedicated his legal career to cold case justice, presented their case with methodical, relentless precision. The cornerstone of the Commonwealth's arguments rested on the seamless convergence of classical detective work and 21st-century forensic science. One by one, state forensic experts took the stand, detailing how advanced MVAC vacuum technology had pulled intact skin cell DNA profiles from the porous interior leather of Item 76B, The glove dropped near Timmy's abandoned bicycle in 1976. The defense team, funded by liquidations of Pendleton's substantial real estate holdings, attempted to launch a furious procedural counteroffensive. They challenged the chain of custody of the 50-year-old evidence box, claiming that ambient cross-contamination could have occurred inside the police evidence locker during the late 1970s. However, the prosecution systematically dismantled these arguments. Lab technicians produced unbroken digital chain of custody logs, environmental control records, and high-resolution microscans proving that the leather glove had remained hermetically sealed in a nitrogen-purged evidence container since its initial collection. Furthermore, the probability of the touch DNA belonging to anyone other than Arthur Pendleton was established as 1 in 13 trillion, a statistical certainty that rendered defense theories of accidental contamination entirely obsolete. The trial took a dramatic turn when the court turned its attention to the physical items recovered from Pendleton's Berkshire property and the subterranean vault beneath his Quincy workshop. The defense attempted to argue that the encrypted journals and trophy items were merely the eccentric, morbid collections of an aging man obsessed with local crime history. But when FBI cryptanalysts took the witness stand, they brought forward the fully decrypted ledgers. On large digital screens mounted throughout the courtroom, the prosecution displayed Pendleton's handwritten alphanumeric codes side by side with official missing person police reports. The cold, mechanical entries in Pendleton's own handwriting, recording dates, weather patterns, locations, and victim initials, left no room for alternative interpretation. As witness after witness testified, the court heard heartbreaking testimony from those who had lived through the era of fear. Former players who were coached by Pendleton in the 1970s and 1980s recalled how the coach maintained absolute authority over their schedules, using late-night training sessions and isolated team trips to isolate vulnerable boys. Former detectives, now in their 80s and 90s, sat in the gallery, watching in solemn silence as the case that had haunted their youth was finally solved before their eyes. The moral weight of the proceedings was unbearable, filling the courtroom with a heavy, collective realization of how deeply one man had corrupted the sacred trust of an entire region. Throughout the weeks of intense testimony, Arthur Pendleton sat at the defense table in a wheelchair, wrapped in a dark cardigan, staring emotionlessly at the polished mahogany table in front of him. He refused to look at the family members seated in the gallery. He offered no visible reaction to the devastating physical evidence displayed on the screens, and he declined to address the court when given the opportunity. His stoic, icy demeanor only reinforced the prosecution's portrait of a calculated, unrepentant predator who had used his public prestige as a suit of armor for half a century. On the 15th day of the proceedings, as the trial neared its conclusion, the prosecution called its final, unexpected witness, Dr. Elizabeth Sterling, the lead forensic geneticist who had performed the initial touch DNA extraction in early 2026. Holding up the original, soil-stained leather glove encased in a clear acrylic vault, Dr. Sterling looked directly at the jury and delivered the definitive summary of the scientific journey. 50 years ago, the perpetrator believed that the rain, the darkness, and the passage of time would wash away his trace. But human biology carries a memory that time cannot erase. The physical truth waited silently in the dark until science caught up to justice. With the evidence concluded and final arguments delivered, the jury retired to deliberate. The verdict came down with astonishing speed. In less than 4 hours, the 12 jurors returned to the courtroom with a unanimous decision. Arthur, Coach Artie, Pendleton was found guilty on all counts, including first-degree murder, aggravated kidnapping, and evidence tampering. The presiding judge sentenced the 82-year-old to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, ordering him transferred immediately to a maximum security state facility where he would spend the remainder of his days isolated from the community he had betrayed. As Pendleton was led away in heavy steel chains, a quiet, profound sense of closure washed over the city of Boston. The 50-year mystery that had frozen the blood of South Boston in the autumn of 1976 was officially closed, its dark secrets dragged into the light, its perpetrator stripped of every honor and condemned to eternal disgrace. Timmy Vance was no longer a forgotten photograph on an unsolved case board. He was a symbol of ultimate truth, whose long-lost leather glove had shattered an empire of lies and proven for all time that no shadow is deep enough to hide the truth forever. Part 6. The trial of Arthur Kochardie Pendleton had reached its definitive, crushing legal conclusion, but inside the specialized units of federal and state law enforcement, the work was far from over. The conviction had legally closed the murder of Timmy Vance, yet the recovery of Pendleton's encrypted journals, trophy vault, and Berkshire property had opened a Pandora's box of historical trauma that spanned half a century. Prosecutors, forensic geneticists, and cold case investigators realized that the 50-year silence surrounding South Boston was only one regional chapter of a vast, terrifying cross-state trail. Across New England, families of young men who had vanished between 1968 and 2005 gathered around news broadcasts, waiting with bated breath as investigators began the agonizing process of matching nameless DNA profiles and missing evidence items to lost loved ones. At the FBI field office in Chelsea, Massachusetts, a joint task force named Operation Fallen Whistle was officially established to process the secondary evidence recovered from Pendleton's properties. The task force brought together veteran homicide detectives, forensic anthropologists, and advanced data scientists specializing in spatial temporal analysis. Their primary directive was to systematically cross-reference every black square found within Pendleton's decrypted journals against national missing persons registries, unsolved homicide archives, and historical athletic travel schedules across Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Vermont, Maine, and upstate New York. The scale of Pendleton's mobility during his 50-year career as a sports director and youth mentor was staggering. Between 1970 and 2000, Pendleton had organized, chaperoned, or directed over 200 regional sports tournaments, summer athletic camps, and community coaching clinics. He possessed unrestricted travel authority, used municipal vans that were never subject to tracking, and frequented rural athletic facilities with zero security oversight. To the communities he visited, he was a generous, charismatic visiting coach offering expert instruction to young athletes. To the task force, every town he visited represented a potential hunting ground where the local authority figures had trusted him implicitly. The first major secondary breakthrough occurred in connection with a long cold case from the summer of 1984 in Cheshire County, New Hampshire. 14-year-old Danny Kramer had vanished while walking home from a regional track meet at a local high school where Pendleton's team had been competing. For 42 years, the Kramer family was told that Danny had likely run away or met with an accident in the surrounding forest. However, inside the steel fireproof safe seized from Pendleton's Quincy workshop, forensic technicians located a small, blue canvas sports duffel bag containing a high school track medal engraved with Kramer's name. Touch DNA extracted from the zipper pull yielded an undeniable genetic match to Pendleton, linking the convicted coach directly to another missing teenager 4 decades after the fact. As task force investigators dug deeper into the physical layout of Pendleton's Berkshire retreat, state police forensic excavation teams returned to the wooded property with heavy industrial equipment and advanced subsurface imaging technology. The initial discovery of the subterranean storage space beneath the barn had raised alarming questions about what else might be concealed beneath the 3-acre parcel. Using high-resolution LiDAR and ground-penetrating radar, geophysicists identified multiple density anomalies buried deep within a dense pine grove at the rear edge of the property line. Over 6 grueling weeks, forensic archaeologists systematically excavated the designated zones under strict crime scene protocols. The work was painstaking and emotionally devastating. What the teams uncovered confirmed the worst fears of the law enforcement community: additional biological remains and preserved personal artifacts buried in shallow, undisturbed earth, dating back to the late 1970s and early 1980s. Each discovery was meticulously documented, cataloged, and rushed to the State Crime Laboratory in Sudbury for immediate genetic extraction and short tandem repeat (STR) profiling. While forensic teams labored in the field, state prosecutors confronted a complex legal and ethical challenge regarding the incarcerated perpetrator himself. Now housed in a single-occupancy cell in the high-security medical wing of the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center, 82-year-old Arthur Pendleton faced the prospect of dozens of additional federal and state indictments. Yet, despite his conviction and life sentence without parole, Pendleton maintained a total, icy refusal to cooperate with investigators. He turned his back during interviews, refused to answer questions regarding the identities of victims linked to his journal entries, and showed complete indifference to the agony of searching families. This persistent, sociopathic stonewalling prompted the Massachusetts Department of Correction, in coordination with the state attorney general's office, to implement a specialized behavioral management strategy. Senior FBI behavioral analysts conducted non-confrontational, indirect assessments, analyzing Pendleton's routine, speech patterns, and historical interactions to identify psychological leverage points. Analysts noted that Pendleton's entire identity rested upon his insatiable desire for control, prestige, and intellectual superiority over those around him. By methodically dismantling his public legacy, removing his name from record books, stripping his coaching titles, and publicly exposing his meticulous journal methods, investigators began to crack his stoic facade. Simultaneously, news of the ongoing task force investigation triggered a massive cultural reckoning across regional sports organizations, educational boards, and municipal governments. The realization that an active, prolific predator had operated with complete impunity for half a century while being rewarded with civic honors, municipal promotions, and public praise forced institutions to confront their historical failures. School districts across New England launched independent audits of past employment records, grievance procedures, and background check protocols from the 1970s and 1980s, attempting to determine how warnings or suspicious behaviors had been ignored or swept under the rug by administrators eager to protect athletic reputations. In South Boston, where the narrative had begun with an abandoned metallic blue bicycle on a rainy October afternoon in 1976, the community stood as the epicenter of a national conversation on historical cold cases and forensic justice. The street corner near Stony Brook Reservation, where Timmy Vance had taken his final ride, had become a permanent sanctuary of memory. Local residents, former teammates, and families from across the country gathered at the site, holding candlelit vigils not only for Timmy, but for all the lost young voices whose stories were finally being dragged out of the dark. The unmasking of Arthur Pendleton had transformed from a local murder investigation into one of the most comprehensive forensic cold case operations in American history. The long-lost leather glove that solved the mystery of 1976 had broken an unbroken chain of silence, proving that while time can bury evidence, the relentless pursuit of scientific truth can break through even the thickest walls of deception and bring long overdue justice to a waiting world. By the spring of 2027, as the snow melted across the pine-studded hills of the Berkshires, the investigative framework established by Operation Fallen Whistle reached a critical, unprecedented juncture. What had begun as a localized Boston cold case arrest had fully matured into a national paradigm shift regarding how modern law enforcement addresses historical, multi-jurisdictional serial offenses. The cold, mechanical reality of Arthur Pendleton's encrypted journals was no longer just evidence in a courtroom. It was an intricate roadmap guiding forensic teams through 3 decades of dark, unaddressed history across New England. At the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory in Sudbury, forensic geneticists worked in continuous shifts utilizing ultra-high-throughput DNA sequencing machines. The biological material recovered from the shallow graves at the Berkshire property, along with personal effects retrieved from Pendleton's subterranean vault, yielded high-grade genomic profiles despite decades of environmental degradation. Each extracted sequence was processed through advanced bioinformatic pipelines designed to reconstruct degraded nuclear DNA strands. The data was then uploaded to state and federal databases, sparking a cascade of confirmed genetic identifications that brought definitive, agonizing answers to families who had spent 40 years in pitch-black uncertainty. One of the most significant identifications involved the 1978 disappearance of 16-year-old Tommy Wright, a star cross-country runner from Worcester who had vanished following a regional track meet in Springfield. For nearly half a century, Wright's disappearance was treated by local authorities as an unsolved runaway case, causing immense, protracted grief for his surviving siblings. However, forensic analysis confirmed that physical remains recovered from the northern boundary of Pendleton's Berkshire estate matched Tommy Wright's family reference DNA with absolute mathematical certainty. Beside the remains, technicians recovered a tarnished metal brass belt buckle engraved with Wright's initials, a sickening trophy that matched a specific alphanumeric entry in Pendleton's 1978 ledger. As the physical evidence mounted, federal prosecutors from the District of Massachusetts, alongside state attorneys from Vermont and New Hampshire, convened at the Joseph Moakley United States Courthouse in Boston to file a comprehensive federal RICO indictment against Arthur Pendleton. The legal strategy was unprecedented, charging the former coach under federal racketeering and kidnapping statutes, arguing that Pendleton had used his public position, his state-funded youth programs, and municipal athletic resources as an organized criminal enterprise to facilitate, execute, and conceal multi-state violent crimes. This legal maneuvering ensured that even if state-level convictions faced future technical appeals, Pendleton would remain permanently incarcerated under non-negotiable federal detainments. Inside the high-security medical unit at the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center, the physical condition of the 82-year-old convict began to deteriorate rapidly. Yet, despite his failing health, Pendleton maintained his psychological warfare against investigators. He refused to speak during scheduled depositions, turning his wheelchair away from prosecutors and closing his eyes whenever photographs of his victims were displayed on the conference room tables. Behavioral analysts noted that Pendleton viewed his silence as his final remaining weapon of power, a desperate attempt to withhold closure from the public and preserve a sense of supreme control over the fates of those he had destroyed. To break this stoic wall of silence, lead prosecutors introduced a revolutionary investigative tactic: the strategic deployment of familial genetic genealogy and spatial modeling during interrogation sessions. Rather than asking open-ended questions, interrogators sat across from Pendleton and methodically laid out completed genetic charts, subsurface map renders of his properties, and high-resolution images of recovered personal items. They demonstrated, down to the exact GPS coordinate and molecular strand, that science had completely dismantled his 50-year secret without requiring a single word of confession from his lips. Confronted with the absolute, incontrovertible reality that his genius-level record-keeping had been entirely decoded, Pendleton's composure began to visibly shatter. Simultaneously, the shockwaves of the investigation triggered a major legislative overhaul across the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and neighboring states. The state legislature unanimously passed the Clara Vance and Timmy Vance Archival and Evidence Preservation Act. This landmark legislation mandated that all biological evidence, physical artifacts, and investigative logs related to unsolved violent crimes must be preserved indefinitely in climate-controlled, digitized state repositories, stripping local municipalities of the legal authority to purge cold case files after statutory periods. Furthermore, the law established a permanent, state-funded cold case forensic task force equipped with dedicated TouchDNA and genealogical technology to continuously audit unsolved disappearances dating back to the mid-20th century. In South Boston, the memory of Timmy Vance became the foundational cornerstone of a broader, national movement dedicated to protecting vulnerable youth and honoring the victims of historic crimes. The local park near Stony Brook Reservation, where Timmy's metallic blue 10-speed bicycle had been found abandoned on that rainy October evening in 1976, was officially rededicated as the Timothy Vance Memorial Peace Park. At the center of the park, a bronze sculpture depicting a solitary, riderless bicycle stood surrounded by manicured flower beds and stone benches engraved with the names of all the young lives uncovered during the investigation. The narrative that began on a cold, suburban street in 1976 had transcended its local origins to become an immortal testament to the power of forensic truth. Arthur Pendleton had built a 50-year empire based on absolute trust, civic prestige, and cold-blooded manipulation, believing that time and secrecy would shield him from consequences. But the quiet advance of forensic science, paired with the relentless, unyielding determination of investigators who refused to forget a lost 15-year-old boy, had torn down his fortress stone by stone. The mystery was solved, the predator was exposed, and the legacy of the victims was permanently enshrined in the bedrock of justice. By the midsummer of 2027, as the federal legal apparatus consolidated its hold over the case of Arthur Pendleton, the momentum generated by Operation Fallen Whistle expanded beyond the borders of New England, establishing a new national standard for cold case homicide investigations. The recovery of Pendleton's encrypted ledgers, coupled with the systematic exhumation of physical artifacts from his properties, had provided law enforcement with a complete blueprint of a predator who had spent half a century using institutional prestige as a weapon. The silent mystery that had begun on a chilly October evening in 1976 was now an internationally recognized case study in forensic genetics, criminal psychology, and institutional reform. At the FBI Academy in Quantico, Virginia, behavioral scientists and forensic genealogists compiled the data from the Pendleton investigation into a specialized curriculum for state and federal investigators. The Pendleton Protocol, as the new training doctrine was designated, focused specifically on identifying high-status, highly trusted community members who utilize civic, athletic, or religious roles to insulate themselves from suspicion. Instructors highlighted how traditional investigative biases had allowed Pendleton to remain cleared for 5 decades despite being one of the last people to see Timmy Vance alive. The lesson was stark and uncompromising. Authority, civic awards, and public grief must never override the cold, objective reality of forensic physical evidence. In the federal court system, prosecutors from the United States Attorney's Office prepared for the formal reading of the master federal indictment at the Moakley Courthouse in Boston. The document charged Pendleton with multiple counts of federal interstate kidnapping resulting in death, civil rights violations under color of authority, and racketeering. The federal charges carried mandatory life sentences without the possibility of release, effectively neutralizing any future state-level appeals or technical petitions regarding evidence chain of custody from the 1970s. The federal indictment served as an unyielding wall, ensuring that the 82-year-old former coach would remain incarcerated inside maximum security federal facilities for the rest of his natural life. Inside the high-security medical wing of the Federal Correctional Complex in Devens, Massachusetts, Arthur Pendleton's physical health continued its steady decline. Deprived of his freedom, his public prestige, and his ability to manipulate those around him, the former coach became an isolated, silent figure. Yet, despite his physical frailty, he maintained his unyielding refusal to utter a single word of confession or remorse. During mandatory legal depositions, he sat motionless, staring past the attorneys and investigators, attempting to project an aura of total indifference to the proceedings around him. However, investigators no longer needed his voice. The science had rendered his silence entirely powerless. Advanced bioinformatic mapping and low-template touch DNA profiling had created an unbroken, irrefutable chain of evidence connecting Pendleton to every victim named in his decrypted ledgers. Microscopic epithelial cells, trapped deep within the leather fibers of Timmy Vance's glove, inside the zippers of recovered duffel bags, and on the surface of personal trophies stored beneath his floorboards, spoke with an absolute, mathematical clarity that no defense attorney could challenge or distort. Across New England, the resolution of these long-standing disappearances initiated a profound process of communal healing. Families who had spent 40 to 50 years living in the suffocating darkness of unresolved grief were finally given definitive answers. In towns across Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Vermont, memorial services were held as lost sons were finally laid to rest with dignity alongside their parents. The prevailing narrative of these communities transformed from one of lingering trauma and unsolved mystery to one of ultimate vindication, driven by the unyielding pursuit of forensic truth. In South Boston, the street corner near Stony Brook Reservation, where a 15-year-old boy had stepped off his metallic blue 10-speed bicycle on a rainy October afternoon in 1976, remained a permanent sanctuary of public memory. The Timothy Vance Memorial Peace Park stood as a quiet, powerful symbol of resilience for the entire city. Every week, residents, law enforcement personnel, and visitors from around the nation gathered at the site, laying fresh flowers beneath the bronze sculpture of the riderless bicycle. The story that had haunted a city for half a century was no longer an open wound or an unsolved cold case. Through the convergence of relentless detective work, revolutionary forensic science, and the refusal of a community to allow a lost child to be forgotten, the dark empire of Arthur Pendleton was completely dismantled. The truth had finally broken through 50 years of silence, ensuring that the memory of Timmy Vance and all the lost voices would forever shine as an eternal beacon of justice over the city of Boston. By the late autumn of 2027, as the federal legal apparatus finalized the remaining administrative motions surrounding the master indictment of Arthur Pendleton, the investigative methodology that unmasked the former coach became a permanent landmark in the global evolution of cold case forensics. What had begun as a lonely, half-century-old mystery on a gravel path near Stony Brook Reservation had systematically reshaped how law enforcement agencies across North America approach historical homicides involving figures of institutional authority. The narrative had moved beyond the confines of a single courtroom in Boston, expanding into a nationwide movement towards systemic accountability, advanced genetic mapping, and the total preservation of historical criminal evidence. In Washington, D.C., the Department of Justice, in coordination with the Federal Bureau of Investigation, announced the formal creation of the National Center for Historical DNA Analysis, and CHDA, at the FBI laboratory in Quantico. Named in memory of Timmy Vance, the state-of-the-art facility was established to house the nation's most advanced touch DNA vacuum extraction systems, specialized low-template genomic sequencers, and dedicated bioinformatics suites. The center's primary mission was to audit tens of thousands of unsolved cold case evidence boxes dating from the pre-DNA era between 1950 and 1990, specifically focusing on cases where biological material had been collected from porous surfaces like leather, paper, and textiles. The technology that pulled Arthur Pendleton's microscopic skin cells from the interior lining of a discarded 1976 glove was now deployed as a standard national asset. Simultaneously, the academic and legal communities consolidated the insights gained from Operation Fallen Whistle into a comprehensive legal framework known as Institutional Forensic Audit Protocols. Major law schools and police academies across the country introduced mandatory courses examining the psychological and systemic failures that allowed Pendleton to hide in plain sight for 5 decades. Students analyzed how institutional bias, social status, and public reverence created a blind spot that protected a serial predator while marginalizing the early suspicions of junior investigators. The curriculum emphasized a fundamental, uncompromising principle: no amount of civic prestige, charitable work, or community standing can ever insulate a suspect from the objective, physical realities of forensic science. In the Federal Medical Correctional Facility at Devens, Massachusetts, 82-year-old Arthur Pendleton lived out his remaining days in total isolation. Stripped of his freedom, his public titles, and his vast real estate assets, which had been fully liquidated by court order to fund restitution trusts for the families of his victims, the convicted coach was a ghost of his former self. He remained under 24-hour medical surveillance, his physical health steadily declining under the weight of advanced age and organ failure. Yet, even as his life ebbed away, Pendleton maintained his absolute, stony silence, refusing to utter a single word of confession to federal interrogators or write a final statement regarding his actions. However, his silence no longer held any power over the public or the legal system. The physical evidence had rendered his refusal to speak entirely irrelevant. The unbroken chain of touch DNA profiles, the recovered personal trophies buried beneath his Berkshire property, and the fully decrypted alphanumeric ledgers spoke with a cold, mathematical certainty that no confession could ever enhance or deny. Science had completely disarmed his 50-year manipulation, stripping him of the control he had so desperately sought to maintain over the narrative of his crimes. Across the communities of South Boston, Worcester, Springfield, and rural New England, the complete legal and physical exposure of Pendleton brought a deep, enduring sense of peace. The agonizing uncertainty that had haunted families for 40 to 50 years had been replaced by the quiet, dignified truth. Memorials were dedicated, historical records were corrected, and lost sons were remembered not as nameless cold case statistics on an unsolved board, but as vibrant young lives whose voices were ultimately restored through the unyielding pursuit of justice. On the quiet edge of Stony Brook Reservation, where 15-year-old Timmy Vance had stepped off his metallic blue 10-speed bicycle on that dark, rainy afternoon in October 1976, the Timothy Vance Memorial Peace Park stood as a serene sanctuary of memory and hope. The bronze sculpture of the riderless bicycle, polished clean and surrounded by fresh white lilies, served as a permanent reminder to every passerby, neighbor, and visiting investigator that light will always pierce the deepest shadow. The 50-year mystery of Boston was solved, the monster was unmasked, and the truth had triumphed forever. By the midsummer of 2028, as the final administrative phase of the Arthur Pendleton federal prosecution reached its formal conclusion, the profound lessons carved out from the sub-basement archives of South Boston established an enduring, global shift in forensic science and civil rights protection. What had begun 52 years earlier as a terrifying, unsolved disappearance on a rain-slicked path near Stony Brook Reservation had evolved into a foundational pillar of modern cold case methodology. The systematic exposure of Coach Artie's dark empire completed its journey through the federal judicial apparatus, leaving behind an indelible blueprint for how democratic societies defend the integrity of their historical records and human lives against the corrupting influence of unbridled civic power. In Washington, D.C., the United States Congress formally passed the Timothy Vance Cold Case Equity Act, an unprecedented piece of federal legislation that mandated the absolute, immutable digital cataloging and genetic preservation of all physical evidence linked to unsolved violent crimes across all 50 states. Under this new statute, any physical or administrative attempt to alter, discard, or compromise cold case evidence carried severe criminal penalties equivalent to evidence tampering in a capital murder trial. The law established an independent federal oversight board, staffed by nonpartisan geneticists, forensic archivists, and veteran homicide detectives, empowered to conduct unannounced audits of local police evidence lockers nationwide. During the ceremonial signing, federal officials noted that the statute transformed Timmy's personal sacrifice into a permanent legal shield protecting every family's right to scientific truth. Simultaneously, the global law enforcement community consolidated the insights gained from the investigation into an established discipline known as archival forensic genetics. Major research universities and federal academies around the world established dedicated chairs and degree programs carrying Timmy Vance's name. Scholars and forensic technicians in these programs were trained to analyze decades-old physical artifacts not merely as passive items, but as complex biological crime scenes bearing microscopic, immortal signatures capable of resolving long-unsolved crimes, serial disappearances, and institutional abuses. The low-template touch DNA vacuum extraction methodology that had painstakingly linked microscopic skin cells on a wet leather glove to Arthur Pendleton became standard operating procedure for international tribunals and domestic investigative agencies worldwide. At the Boston Museum of Science, a permanent exhibition entitled The Immortal Strand, Forensic Truth and the Unmasking of Arthur Pendleton opened its doors to an unprecedented influx of visitors from around the globe. Beyond displaying the high-resolution microscans of the famous 1976 leather glove and the forensic tools that shattered Pendleton's airtight alibi, the gallery housed a state-of-the-art educational suite dedicated to investigating historical cold cases and ethical forensics. Visitors standing before the climate-controlled display of the original metallic blue bicycle reflected on the unfaltering progress of science and human resolve. The space stood as a living monument of truth, ensuring that the relentless drive to uncover the past would continue to illuminate the future. In South Boston, the quiet neighborhood where 15-year-old Timmy Vance took his final ride remained a place of profound reverence, memory, and quiet beauty. The street leading to Stony Brook Reservation was officially co-named Timothy Vance Way by a unanimous vote of the Boston City Council. Every morning, passers-by, students, and neighborhood residents paused by the bronze riderless bicycle sculpture to leave fresh, white lilies and roses beside the polished plaque. The location had become far more than a site of historical tragedy. It was a living symbol of community resilience, reminding the city that beneath its modern skyline, the moral foundation of justice rests upon the quiet, unyielding courage of those who refuse to let the lost be forgotten. The complete narrative of the 1976 Boston cold case, spanning decades of agonizing silence, meticulous investigation, revolutionary genetic breakthroughs, and absolute justice, stood fulfilled and complete. The official case file within the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office and the Federal Bureau of Investigation remains securely locked, stamped with the permanent seal of final resolution. Arthur Pendleton died in absolute isolation and disgrace, his wealth stripped, his legacy erased, and his name forever synonymous with cowardly hubris and predatory deception. Timmy Vance, once a silent victim lost to the dark autumn of 1976, lives on as an immortal beacon of justice, a shining proof that no shadow is deep enough to hide the truth forever, and that a single microscopic trace, brought to light by science and determination, can dismantle an empire of lies and echo through eternity. With the complete collapse of Arthur Pendleton's public defense and the final sealing of his federal conviction, the journey of the 1976 Boston cold case reached its grand, emotional climax. The unmasking of Coach Artie, a man who spent half a century masquerading as South Boston's premier mentor while hiding a terrifying double life, stood as the ultimate triumph of modern forensic science over time, status, and calculated manipulation. What began on a crisp, rain-slicked October afternoon when 15-year-old Timmy Vance stepped off his metallic blue bicycle had finally arrived at its absolute, permanent resolution. The 50-year dark age of uncertainty had officially ended, giving way to an era of total clarity and unyielding justice. The final legal chapter took place inside the ceremonial courtroom of the John Adams Courthouse in downtown Boston. Representatives from every law enforcement agency involved in Operation Fallen Whistle, from the local detectives who preserved the physical evidence in 1976 to the lead FBI forensic geneticists who extracted the touch DNA in 2026, gathered alongside the surviving relatives of Pendleton's victims. In a solemn, dignified proceeding, the district attorney formally presented the court with a completed, cross-jurisdictional master case file. Bound in heavy black leather and stamped with the official seals of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the document cataloged every piece of recovered evidence, every decrypted ledger page, and every confirmed genetic match. With a heavy stroke of the judicial pen, the presiding judge officially declared the case closed, not merely as solved, but as a permanent, non-appealable legal precedent. In her closing address to the court, the judge captured the profound significance of the 50-year struggle. Arthur Pendleton operated under the arrogant delusion that time was his greatest accomplice. He believed that as memories faded, as witnesses passed away, and as rain washed over the earth, his secrets would be swallowed by history. But he failed to realize that justice does not age. Science does not forget. And this community refused to let the name of Timmy Vance fade into the dark. The physical evidence that had dismantled Pendleton's fortress of lies, the faded, rain-saturated leather glove recovered from the gravel path in 1976, was given its final, permanent home. Rather than being destroyed or returned to a dark storage box, Item 76B was encased in a state-of-the-art, nitrogen-purged glass vault within the permanent archives of the Massachusetts State Police Museum. Set alongside high-resolution holographic displays illustrating the microscopic skin cells pulled from its fibers, the exhibit served as a sacred reminder to future generations of law enforcement officers. It demonstrated that no piece of evidence, no matter how small or old, is ever truly silent. Inside the high-security medical wing of the Federal Correctional Complex, Arthur Pendleton's physical life quietly came to its natural end. Dying in absolute isolation at 82 years old, the disgraced former coach was buried in an unmarked grave, stripped of every civic honor, every coaching championship, and every penny of his liquidated wealth. His name, once spoken with reverence across high school gymnasiums and community centers, was permanently scrubbed from record books, trophy plaques, and street signs across New England. In the cultural memory of Boston, Pendleton was reduced to what he had always been in secret, a pathetic, cowardly predator whose grand illusion was completely shattered by the very community he had sought to destroy. In South Boston, the Timothy Vance Memorial Peace Park stood bathed in the warm, golden light of late summer. The bronze sculpture of the riderless 10-speed bicycle, surrounded by blooming white lilies and stone benches, had become the true heart of the neighborhood. Children played safely on the surrounding lawns, while parents sat nearby, enjoying the peace that had been stolen from their streets 50 years earlier. The park was no longer a monument to grief, but a sanctuary of victory, a living proof that the bonds of community, truth, and love are infinitely stronger than the darkest shadows of deception. The story of Timmy Vance, told across 11 continuous parts of mystery, tragedy, relentless investigation, and world-altering forensic breakthroughs, stands fully realized and eternally complete. The case file in the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office remains locked in the vault of historical justice, sealed forever against the passage of time. The phantom that haunted South Boston in 1976 has been unmasked, defeated, and cast out. Timmy Vance lives on, not as a lost boy in a yellowed newspaper clipping, but as an immortal symbol of human resilience, a catalyst for global scientific revolution, and a shining promise that truth will always prevail, breaking through 50 years of darkness to light the way home. As the summer sun dipped behind the historic brownstones of South Boston, casting long, golden shadows across the pavement, the final ripples of the Arthur Pendleton case settled into the bedrock of American legal history. The journey through 11 distinct chapters of tragedy, investigation, forensic revolution, and legal reckoning had reached its absolute, definitive conclusion. Yet, in the quiet spaces where the human heart processes the weight of time, the final chapter of this historic saga belonged not to the courtrooms, the scientific laboratories, or the federal archives, but to the spirit of a community that had refused to surrender to despair. At the Suffolk County Superior Courthouse, the heavy brass doors of the Historical Cold Case Registry were sealed shut in a brief, private ceremony attended by the lead investigators, forensic technicians, and surviving family members. The thick, leather-bound volume containing the complete documentation of the 1976 disappearance, Case File 76-0941, was officially locked inside a climate-controlled, secure archival vault. On its front cover, stamped in bold, gold foil letters, were the final, definitive words, solved and closed. For 50 long, painful years, that file had represented an open wound, an unanswered prayer, and a haunting question mark in the history of Boston. Now, it stood as an immortal monument to the power of truth and human perseverance. In the quiet neighborhood of South Boston, the evening air was filled with the gentle sounds of everyday life, children laughing in the distance, bicycles humming along the freshly paved streets, and neighbors greeting one another on their front porches. Near the entrance of the Stony Brook Reservation, the Timothy Vance Memorial Peace Park stood bathed in the warm twilight. The bronze sculpture of the riderless 10-speed bicycle gleamed softly, surrounded by fresh white flowers, handwritten notes of gratitude, and small candles flickering in the evening breeze. It was no longer a place of tragedy, but a sanctuary of quiet triumph, a reminder that no matter how long the night lasts, the dawn will always come. Across the United States and around the world, the story of Timmy Vance, Coach Artie, and the rainy October afternoon in 1976 had transcended its origins to become an eternal symbol of hope for missing persons cases everywhere. The groundbreaking touch DNA vacuum extraction methods, the advanced bioinformatic mapping techniques, and the legislative protections forged in the furnace of this investigation continued to bring closure to hundreds of other families who had spent decades waiting in the dark. The legacy of a 15-year-old boy from South Boston had become a shield protecting the innocent and a light guiding law enforcement toward historical justice for generations to come. Inside the quiet sanctuary of the Peace Park, as the stars began to appear in the clear New England sky, the final, undeniable truth of the case echoed through the silence. Arthur Pendleton had built a 50-year empire of lies, hiding behind public awards, authority, and calculated deception, believing that time and secrecy would grant him total immunity. But his empire had crumbled into dust, stripped away by the relentless march of scientific progress and the unyielding determination of those who cared. In the end, the evil that had stalked the streets of South Boston in 1976 was totally erased, while the name of Timothy, Timmy, Vance shone brighter than ever, an immortal beacon of love, memory, and ultimate justice, echoing through eternity. The morning light broke clearly over the harbor, washing the red brick facades of South Boston in a soft, golden hue. With the physical records permanently archived and the legal mechanisms fully satisfied, the story of Timothy, Timmy, Vance, and the unmasking of Arthur, Coach Artie, Pendleton transitioned from active history into an enduring, living legacy. The finality was absolute, leaving no lingering doubts, no unresolved emotions, and no remaining shadows. Across the neighborhood where a 15-year-old boy had once ridden his 10-speed bicycle into the chilly October mist of 1976, a profound sense of stillness took hold, a quiet, collective breath taken by a city that had carried a heavy heart for half a century. At the central headquarters of the Massachusetts State Police, the dedicated workspace that had served as the nerve center for Operation Fallen Whistle was officially decommissioned. The large whiteboard displays, once covered in dense networks of timelines, spatial travel maps, decrypted journal fragments, and DNA sequence charts, were cleared for the last time. Yet, the spirit of that room remained deeply etched into the department's operational philosophy. The Joint Task Force had proven that time is not an insurmountable barrier to justice, establishing a precedent that altered the mindset of homicide detectives nationwide. No cold case would ever again be dismissed as too old, no piece of physical evidence viewed as too degraded, and no suspect considered too respected to face scientific scrutiny. In the academic halls of Boston-area universities, research programs dedicated to ethical forensics and community safety incorporated the case into their core curricula. Students studied how a combination of public trust, social status, and institutional inertia allowed a predator to operate undetected, using these insights to design better safeguard systems for youth programs. The analytical framework developed during the investigation became a foundational text, teaching future generations of criminal justice professionals that true vigilance requires questioning authority and relying on objective, verifiable physical evidence. The lessons learned from the 50-year saga became a shield, actively protecting future generations from the very vulnerabilities Pendleton had exploited. At the Timothy Vance Memorial Peace Park, near the quiet tree-lined border of Stony Brook Reservation, the atmosphere was one of serene permanence. The bronze sculpture of the riderless bicycle stood as a central landmark, surrounded by manicured gardens that bloomed vibrant white in the summer air. Local residents walked past during their morning routines, stopping briefly to glance at the bronze plaque or adjust the flowers left by visitors from around the country. The park had become a place of quiet reflection, where the memory of a lost boy was no longer tied to grief or terror, but to the triumph of truth, community solidarity, and scientific brilliance. As night fell over the city of Boston, the streetlights flickered to life along the neighborhood avenues, casting long, peaceful beams onto the pavement. The dark mystery that had haunted South Boston for 5 decades was fully resolved, the perpetrator completely exposed and stripped of his false honor, and the memory of Timmy Vance permanently enshrined in the bedrock of justice. The final page had been turned, leaving behind an immortal truth that would echo through the decades. No matter how much time passes, light will always break through the darkest night, and the pursuit of justice will never end. The final embers of the Arthur Pendleton case settled into the permanent cultural fabric of New England, bringing an absolute, unbreakable sense of finality to a story that had spanned over half a century. In the aftermath of the federal declarations, legal sealings, and archival lockings, the city of Boston no longer looked back at October 1976 with a sense of unresolved dread. The dark, persistent ghost that had haunted the tree-lined avenues of South Boston for 50 years had been stripped of its mystery, its power, and its terrifying anonymity. What remained was a clear, unassailable truth carved into the bedrock of modern American justice. At the Suffolk County Courthouse, the physical artifacts that had driven the investigation were systematically processed into permanent, secure federal archives. The encrypted journals, the decrypted digital ledgers, and the microscopic touch DNA extractions were cataloged under the permanent custody of the National Center for Historical DNA Analysis. These materials were no longer treated merely as evidence against a single perpetrator, but as a priceless educational standard for forensic scientists across the globe. Researchers from international police federations and federal intelligence agencies regularly traveled to Boston to study the exact protocols that transformed a degraded, 50-year-old leather glove into an irrefutable weapon of absolute truth. In the quiet residential neighborhoods of South Boston, the long-term emotional transformation was profound. For 2 generations, parents had spoken of the 1976 disappearance in hushed, protective tones, treating the Stony Brook Reservation as a place of lingering peril. Now, that atmosphere of quiet fear was entirely replaced by an enduring sense of communal strength and relief. Families walked freely along the paved trails where Timmy Vance had once ridden his 10-speed bicycle, their steps light and unburdened. The unmasking of Coach Artie had removed the sinister shadow of the unknown, proving to the entire community that no predator, regardless of his status or patience, could outrun the relentless march of justice. At the Timothy Vance Memorial Peace Park, the riderless bronze bicycle stood illuminated under the soft glow of solar-powered park lanterns as evening fell over the city. Fresh white lilies, handwritten notes from local school children, and memorial stones from families across the country continued to rest gently against the polished stone base. The park had become a national sanctuary of hope, a place where people gathered not to mourn an unsolved tragedy, but to celebrate the victory of human determination, scientific brilliance, and unwavering love over decades of silence and deception. As the late-night stars filled the sky above the Boston Harbor, the narrative of the 1976 cold case reached its ultimate, peaceful rest. The legal records were locked, the evidence was preserved, the perpetrator was exposed and erased from public honor, and the victim's name was forever elevated as an immortal beacon of light. The long, dark autumn of 1976 had finally given way to a permanent, brilliant dawn, ensuring that the memory of Timmy Vance would shine bright, unbroken, and eternal through all the years to come. The morning sun rose high above the Atlantic coastline, scattering brilliant light across the quiet streets of South Boston and signaling the definitive start of a new, unburdened era. With every legal motion satisfied, every archive locked, and every forensic lesson integrated into the national consciousness, the 1976 Boston cold case reached its ultimate, timeless conclusion. The long journey that had begun with the disappearance of 15-year-old Timmy Vance on a rain-soaked autumn afternoon had moved far beyond the realm of unresolved crime. It was now a permanent testament to the triumph of scientific truth over systematic deception and the power of love over decades of agonizing silence. At the FBI field office in Chelsea, the Special Task Force binder for Operation Fallen Whistle was formally transferred to the historical vault of solved cold cases. The digital displays that had once tracked the spatial movements of Arthur Coach Artie Pendleton across New England were powered down, their work complete. Investigators who had dedicated years to unraveling the encrypted journals, sifting through soil samples in the Berkshires, and analyzing microscopic touch DNA strands gathered one last time for a quiet moment of reflection. There were no celebratory speeches, only a deep, shared understanding that they had fulfilled a sacred promise made to a lost boy and his grieving family 50 years prior. Across the United States, the legal and institutional reforms sparked by the case continued to yield profound results. Forensic laboratories nationwide, operating under the federal guidelines established in Timmy Vance's memory, successfully resolved hundreds of long-dormant missing persons cases using the low-template DNA extraction methods refined during the Pendleton investigation. Families in small towns and major cities across the country were finally given answers, bringing peace to households that had suffered in the dark for generations. The legacy of South Boston had become a national shield, ensuring that no cold case would ever be abandoned and no victim forgotten. In South Boston itself, the physical landscape carried the quiet beauty of a community fully healed. The Stony Brook Reservation, once viewed with lingering apprehension, was filled with the sounds of morning joggers, families walking along the tree-lined paths, and children playing under the open sky. Near the entrance, the Timothy Vance Memorial Peace Park stood as a serene sanctuary. The bronze sculpture of the riderless 10-speed bicycle gleamed softly in the sunlight, surrounded by vibrant beds of white flowers and stone benches where neighbors gathered to share stories and enjoy the peaceful morning air. As the day drew to a close and the golden hour settled over the city, the story of Timmy Vance achieved its absolute, immortal peace. Arthur Pendleton's dark empire of lies had been completely dismantled, his name stripped of honor and cast into total obscurity, while the truth had risen bright and unyielding to illuminate the world. The mystery was solved, the victim was honored, and the light had conquered the dark forever. The case of the 1976 Boston cold case was officially, permanently, and triumphantly closed. The deep blue twilight of midsummer settled over the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, wrapping the historic harbor and the neighborhood of South Boston in a quiet, solemn grace. With the final administrative filings complete and the forensic paradigms fully integrated into the national judicial framework, the case of Timmy Vance and the exposure of Arthur, Coach Artie, Pendleton reached its absolute, ultimate resting point. What had started as a terrifying mystery on a rain-slicked October path in 1976 had transcended time, technology, and human malice, leaving behind a legacy that would forever safeguard the memory of the lost and protect the innocence of future generations. At the Suffolk County District Attorney's Office, the final physical task of the 50-year investigation was carried out in total silence. Lead prosecutors and veteran investigators gathered around the central archival table where the master case file lay open for the last time. Beneath the official stamps of the Commonwealth and the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the final entry was typed in clean, definitive black ink. All leads exhausted. All evidence verified by touch DNA and bioinformatic mapping. Perpetrator deceased in federal custody. Case permanently resolved. As the heavy cover was drawn closed and the steel lock clicked into place inside the subterranean evidence vault, an overwhelming sense of profound relief washed over the room. The long night that had gripped South Boston for half a century was officially, completely over. Across the region, the systemic impact of Operation Fallen Whistle continued to reshape the landscape of institutional oversight and law enforcement. Municipalities, athletic federations, and youth organizations throughout New England implemented strict, independent auditing mechanisms designed to ensure that no individual, regardless of their civic stature or community adoration, could ever again operate above suspicion or manipulate institutional trust. The memory of how Pendleton had leveraged his reputation as a respected mentor to shield his horrific crimes became a mandatory case study in criminal justice academies nationwide. Future generations of law enforcement officers were trained to remember that true public service requires unyielding vigilance, transparency, and an unwavering commitment to objective physical evidence over human authority. In the laboratories of the National Center for Historical DNA Analysis, scientists continued to utilize the low-template touch DNA vacuum extraction techniques perfected during the Pendleton case to unlock cold cases from across the nation. Every degraded fiber, every forgotten piece of leather, and every old paper document brought into the facility carried the potential to bring long overdue answers to searching families. The microscopic skin cells extracted from Timmy Vance's wet leather glove had opened a doorway to a new era of forensic truth, proving to the world that science possesses an immortal memory capable of reaching back through decades of darkness to deliver justice. In South Boston, the Timothy Vance Memorial Peace Park stood as a timeless beacon of hope, resilience, and community strength. The bronze sculpture of the riderless 10-speed bicycle, forever catching the soft glow of the park lights, remained surrounded by fresh white lilies, polished stones, and tokens of affection left by neighbors and visitors alike. Children laughed and played along the nearby greenways of Stony Brook Reservation, free from the shadow of the unknown that had once hung over the neighborhood. The park was no longer a place defined by loss, but a sanctuary dedicated to the enduring power of truth, love, and remembrance. As the midnight sky filled with brilliant stars over the Boston skyline, the final chapter of the 1976 cold case stood complete, whole, and unassailable. Arthur Pendleton's dark empire of lies had been shattered into dust, his false prestige erased, and his legacy reduced to an unremembered grave. In contrast, the name of Timmy Vance shone bright and eternal, an unextinguishable light that had broken through 50 years of silence, changed the world forever, and brought timeless peace to the heart of Boston. Part 17. The midnight hour passed over the city, leaving South Boston bathed in the quiet, silver glow of a clear summer moon. Across every street where Timmy Vance had once played, from the red brick triple-deckers near Andrews Square to the peaceful, winding edge of Stony Brook Reservation, an absolute, unbreakable tranquility held firm. The 50-year story of the 1976 cold case, the terrifying shadow of Coach Artie Pendleton, and the revolutionary forensic breakthroughs of Operation Fallen Whistle had reached their absolute, ultimate horizon. Nothing was left unsaid, no evidence remained unexamined, and no shadow lingered over the truth. In the quiet corridors of the John Adams Courthouse, the final legal administrative summaries were cataloged into the Permanent State Historical Register. The case of Commonwealth versus Arthur Pendleton was officially designated as the definitive landmark case for 20th century historical homicide resolution in North America. The legal opinions, forensic affidavits, and genetic sequence reports generated during the proceedings were compiled into a master reference archive for the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts. Jurists, legal scholars, and civil rights advocates from around the world recognize the case as a masterclass in balancing modern genetic science, constitutional due process, and the protection of historical criminal evidence. In the laboratories of forensic geneticists across the country, the legacy of the investigation continued to bear fruit every single day. The low-template touch DNA protocols pioneered on Timmy Vance's rain-soaked leather glove were now standard practice in over 40 states and dozens of international law enforcement agencies. Old evidence lockers that had gathered dust for 30, 40, or 50 years were systematically reopened, yielding answers for families who had long believed their lost loved ones were forgotten by time. Each breakthrough, each confirmed match, and each long-awaited reunion of truth owed its existence to the meticulous work performed in Boston, turning a single tragedy into a universal source of hope and healing. At the Sousa Baranowski Correctional Center and the Federal Medical Facility, where Pendleton spent his final days, no monuments, plaques, or records of honor remained. The former coach had been completely erased from the civic memory of Massachusetts. The awards that had once filled municipal display cases were destroyed, his name was removed from coaching halls of fame, and his liquidated assets continued to fund victim advocacy programs across New England. Pendleton was left with nothing, a total, absolute erasure of the false prestige he had spent a lifetime building through deception and violence. In South Boston, the Timothy Vance Memorial Peace Park stood as a serene, eternal sanctuary under the starry night sky. The riderless bronze bicycle, illuminated by the gentle glow of the park lights, stood as a monument to victory, resilience, and unyielding love. Parents who had grown up in the shadow of the 1976 disappearance now walked through the park with their own children, teaching them that courage, truth, and community solidarity will always overcome the darkest forces of secrecy. The park was filled not with the ghosts of the past, but with the living promise of a safe, bright future. As the first faint light of dawn began to paint the eastern horizon over Boston Harbor, the final page of the story turned for the last time. The narrative of the 1976 Boston cold case stood complete, perfect, and eternally sealed in the halls of justice. The mystery was solved, the predator was destroyed, and the truth had conquered the dark forever. Timmy Vance was finally, fully, and peacefully at rest, his memory shining as an immortal beacon of light over the city he loved, echoing through eternity. Part 18. The morning light broke cleanly over Boston Harbor, illuminating the historic skyline and casting a warm, golden glow across the quiet neighborhoods of South Boston. As the city woke to the start of a new day, the story of Timmy Vance, and the unmasking of Arthur, Coach Artie Pendleton stood fully realized, completely resolved, and permanently etched into the annals of American legal and forensic history. What had begun 50 years earlier as an agonizing, unsolved mystery on a rain-slicked path near Stony Brook Reservation had reached its absolute, definitive, and timeless conclusion. At the Massachusetts State Police Crime Laboratory in Sudbury, the specialized equipment and analytical suites that had been dedicated to Operation Fallen Whistle were now integrated into the permanent infrastructure of the state's forensic operations. The advanced low-template touch DNA extraction methods and bioinformatic pipelines developed to process the 1976 leather glove had become the standard operating protocol for every historical homicide investigation across New England. The laboratory stood as a world-class center of forensic excellence, visited by international researchers, federal agents, and geneticists seeking to learn the exact scientific methodologies that had successfully dismantled half a century of calculated deception. In the legal and academic spheres, the extensive documentation generated during the prosecution of Arthur Pendleton was bound into a master reference collection housed at the Harvard Law School Library and the Social Law Library at the John Adams Courthouse. Titled The Pendleton Proceedings, Forensic Innovation, Institutional Accountability, and Historical Homicide Resolution, the multi-volume work provided future generations of prosecutors, defense attorneys, and judges with a comprehensive guide to navigating complex, multi-jurisdictional cold cases. The volumes detailed every aspect of the case, from the initial recovery of microtraces of skin cells and the decryption of spatial temporal ledgers to the federal racketeering indictments that ensured total legal finality. Across the United States, the federal and state legislative reforms born out of the investigation continued to safeguard historical evidence and protect vulnerable youth. The Timothy Vance Cold Case Equity Act ensured that local municipalities could never again purge, alter, or neglect physical evidence from unsolved violent crimes. Every evidence locker in the nation was now subject to strict digital tracking and periodic federal audits, guaranteeing that future scientific breakthroughs would always have access to the physical artifacts necessary to uncover the truth. The law stood as an enduring legal shield, transforming the tragedy of 1976 into a permanent source of protection for missing persons and their families across the nation. Inside the federal maximum security facilities where Arthur Pendleton had spent his final days, his memory had completely vanished. His name had been scrubbed from every coaching archive, athletic record, and municipal plaque in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. His real estate assets and personal accounts, liquidated by court order, were fully distributed to victim advocacy funds and independent cold case research foundations. In the end, the man who had spent 5 decades cultivating a public persona of civic leadership and mentorship was remembered only as a hollow, defeated criminal whose elaborate web of lies was shattered by the cold, objective reality of modern science. In South Boston, the Timothy Vance Memorial Peace Park stood as the serene, living heart of the community. Located at the edge of the Stony Brook Reservation where 15-year-old Timmy had taken his final ride, the park was a place of quiet beauty, reflection, and enduring hope. The bronze sculpture of the riderless 10-speed bicycle caught the morning sun, surrounded by manicured flower beds, stone benches, and fresh, white lilies left by residents and visitors alike. Families walked along the paved pathways, children played in the nearby open fields, and neighbors gathered in peace, knowing that the shadow that had hung over their neighborhood for 50 years was forever gone. The case of the 1976 Boston cold case was complete in every dimension, forensically, legally, historically, and emotionally. The physical evidence was preserved in federal vaults. The legal files were locked with the permanent stamp of resolution. The perpetrator was exposed and erased from public honor, and the memory of Timmy Vance was forever elevated as an immortal beacon of truth and justice. The long, dark night of uncertainty was over, replaced by a permanent, brilliant dawn that would shine over Boston for generations to come. The midday sun stood at its peak over the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, casting a brilliant, warm light across the red brick triple-deckers of South Boston, the quiet waters of the harbor, and the dense pine trails of Stony Brook Reservation. With every legal requirement fulfilled, every scientific method codified, and every institutional reform enacted, the narrative of Timmy, Vance, and the exposure of Arthur, Coach Artie, Pendleton reached an absolute, unshakable plateau of permanent resolution. The 50-year arch of mystery, grief, investigation, and triumph had crossed its final threshold, settling into a state of timeless, quiet perfection. At the federal court level, the final administrative dockets associated with Operation Fallen Whistle were officially signed and closed by the Chief Judge of the United States District Court for the District of Massachusetts. The massive judicial framework, encompassing state homicide charges, federal racketeering counts, interstate kidnapping indictments, and civil forfeiture proceedings, was bound together into a single, permanent master judicial index. This master document was formally placed into the National Archives and Records Administration, designated as a protected national treasure of American jurisprudence. It stood as a complete, incontrovertible record detailing how modern forensic genetics and relentless detective work completely dismantled a 50-year campaign of predatory deception. At the FBI field office in Chelsea and the Massachusetts State Police Homicide Unit, the investigative personnel who had carried the weight of the cold case retired the operational call signs and dedicated digital servers used during the multi-year task force operation. The physical conference rooms that had once been filled with spatial temporal mapping boards, encrypted ledger translations, and genetic sequence charts were returned to standard operational use. Yet, the legacy of the Pendleton investigation remained permanently embedded in the agency's DNA. The success of the operation established a permanent culture of relentless persistence, ensuring that no unsolved homicide in the region would ever be considered too old, too forgotten, or too obscured by time to be pursued with the full force of modern science. In the laboratories of the National Center for Historical DNA Analysis at Quantico, the analytical protocols developed for the 1976 Boston cold case continued to serve as the global benchmark for low-template genetic sequencing. Scientists and forensic technicians from around the world regularly spent months at the facility studying the precise vacuum extraction techniques that had successfully pulled microscopic epithelial cells from the porous interior lining of Timmy Vance's rain-soaked leather glove. The technology that had broken the silence of 1976 was now actively resolving cold cases across Europe, Asia, and the Americas, transforming a localized tragedy into a universal source of scientific light and human healing. Across the state of Massachusetts, the legislative protections created under the Timothy Vance Cold Case Equity Act operated seamlessly within municipal and state law enforcement agencies. Digital tracking systems monitored every evidence locker in the Commonwealth, guaranteeing climate-controlled preservation for all physical artifacts linked to unresolved violent crimes. Municipalities were legally barred from ever destroying or neglecting physical evidence, ensuring that as forensic technology continues to advance in the decades and centuries ahead, every missing person and unsolved homicide will have an unbroken bridge to ultimate justice. In the neighborhood of South Boston, the long-term psychological healing was complete. The quiet fear that had haunted generations of parents and children since October 1976 had been entirely replaced by an enduring sense of pride, resilience, and unity. Streets where residents once spoke of the disappearance in hushed, sorrowful tones were now filled with the vibrant energy of community life. The unmasking of Coach Artie had removed the lingering terror of the unknown, proving to every family in the city that light will always conquer darkness and that the bonds of community love are far stronger than the calculated lies of any predator. At the Timothy Vance Memorial Peace Park, situated at the peaceful entrance to Stony Brook Reservation, the riderless bronze bicycle gleamed under the bright afternoon sun. Surrounding the sculpture, manicured gardens of white lilies, roses, and evergreen shrubs flourished in full bloom, meticulously cared for by local volunteers and neighborhood youth. Visitors from across the country sat on the polished granite benches, listening to the gentle rustle of the pine trees and reading the inscription engraved on the central stone tablet. In memory of Timothy, Timmy Vance, whose lost voice reached across 50 years to bring truth, healing, and justice to the world. The narrative of the 1976 Boston cold case stood fulfilled in its entirety. The legal files were locked. The physical evidence was protected in federal vaults, the perpetrator was erased from public honor, and the memory of Timmy Vance was forever enshrined as an immortal beacon of hope, truth, and eternal justice over the city of Boston. As the late afternoon sun began its slow descent toward the western horizon, casting a deep, amber glow across the waters of Massachusetts Bay, the 50-year saga of Timmy Vance and the exposure of Arthur, Coach Artie, Pendleton reached its quiet, eternal twilight. Every forensic detail had been analyzed, every legal motion executed, every institutional reform enacted, and every human heart touched by the tragedy brought to a place of profound, permanent peace. The long, winding road that had begun on a chilly, rain-soaked October afternoon in 1976 had finally arrived at its absolute, unshakable terminus. At the Massachusetts State House in downtown Boston, the governor, alongside members of the state legislature, hosted a formal, private ceremony to dedicate the State Archive for Historical Justice. Located within a subterranean, climate-controlled vault beneath the historic Capitol building, the archive was built specifically to house the physical records, forensic sequence reports, and judicial decrees of the Commonwealth's most significant resolved cold cases. Case File 76-0941, containing the complete documentation of Timmy Vance's disappearance, the decryption of Pendleton's encrypted ledgers, and the touch DNA analysis of the 1976 leather glove, was officially placed into Vault Slot 001. Stamped with the executive seal of the Commonwealth, the file was designated as a permanent, non-circulating historical treasure, ensuring that the lessons learned from the case would remain preserved in perpetuity for future generations of public servants and legal scholars. In the academic and forensic communities, the methodologies born out of Operation Fallen Whistle were formally integrated into standard international curricula. The United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime, in collaboration with Interpol, published a comprehensive training manual titled Advanced Bioinformatic Mapping and Low-Template DNA Recovery in Historical Crimes, Lessons from the Boston 1976 Investigation. The manual was translated into dozens of languages and distributed to law enforcement academies, forensic institutes, and human rights organizations worldwide. The microscopic skin cells extracted from the interior lining of a wet leather glove in Boston had set off a global scientific revolution, providing international investigators with the precise technical tools needed to identify long-hidden serial offenses and bring long-overdue answers to searching families on every continent. Across the United States, the long-term impact of the Timothy Vance Cold Case Equity Act continued to transform the national criminal justice system. The independent federal oversight board established by the statute completed its first nationwide audit of municipal evidence lockers, ensuring that tens of thousands of historical evidence items, ranging from clothing fibers to old paper records, were digitized, barcoded, and stored in climate-controlled environments. Across the country, cold case units operating under these new federal guidelines reported an unprecedented wave of successful resolutions as advanced genetic mapping techniques unlocked mysteries that had baffled investigators for decades. The tragedy of a 15-year-old boy from South Boston had become a national shield, guaranteeing that no lost child would ever be forgotten and no cold case left to crumble in the dark. Inside the federal maximum security complex where Arthur Pendleton spent his final days, the erasure of his false legacy was total and absolute. The community centers, athletic fields, and high school gymnasiums that had once borne his name across New England had all been renamed in honor of the victims, local community leaders, or advocates for youth safety. Every trophy, plaque, and record associated with his 50-year coaching career was permanently destroyed or scrubbed from official registers. In the public memory of the region he had terrorized, Pendleton was remembered only as a pathetic, manipulative criminal whose grand illusion was completely shattered by the cold, objective reality of modern science. His dark empire of lies had been reduced to dust, leaving behind no legacy, no honor, and no voice. In South Boston, The quiet neighborhood where the tragedy had begun half a century earlier was filled with the peaceful, reassuring rhythms of evening life. The red brick triple-deckers along East Broadway glowed softly in the warm twilight as families sat on their porches, sharing meals and enjoying the summer air. Children rode their bicycles along the sidewalks, their laughter echoing through the streets where fear had once reigned in secret. The unmasking of Coach Artie had permanently lifted the shadow of the unknown, giving the community a deep, enduring sense of safety, unity, and resilience that would carry forward through generations. At the Timothy Vance Memorial Peace Park, situated at the quiet edge of Stony Brook Reservation where Timmy had taken his final ride, the bronze sculpture of the riderless 10-speed bicycle caught the soft, golden light of the setting sun. Surrounding the monument, manicured gardens of white lilies and evergreen shrubs stood in full, vibrant bloom. Fresh white flowers, small flickering candles, and handwritten notes of love from residents and visitors from around the world rested against the polished granite base. The park was no longer a symbol of loss or unresolved grief, but a sanctuary of quiet triumph, a living testament to the unyielding power of community love, scientific truth, and moral justice. As the last rays of sunlight faded from the sky and the first evening stars appeared over Boston Harbor, the final page of the 50-year saga turned for the last time. The physical evidence was locked in historical vaults, the legal proceedings were finished, the predator was exposed and erased, and the memory of Timmy Vance was forever elevated as an immortal beacon of light and hope over the city he loved. The case of the 1976 Boston cold case was complete, whole, and eternally closed. Timmy Vance was finally, fully, and peacefully home. The gentle mantle of twilight deepened into a quiet, starry night over the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, casting a serene radiance across the historic cityscape of Boston and the tranquil waters of the bay. Every thread of the multi-decade saga, from the initial heartbreak on a rainy October afternoon in 1976 to the triumphant forensic unmasking of Arthur Coach Artie Pendleton half a century later, had been woven into a seamless, permanent tapestry of justice. The story of Timmy Vance had crossed its ultimate boundary, moving entirely out of the realm of active investigation and into the quiet halls of eternal remembrance. In the quiet, marble-lined reading room of the Massachusetts Historical Society, the primary archival collection documenting the Vance investigation was formally catalogued under the custody of state historians and senior archivists. Box 001 through Box 150 contained thousands of digitized forensic logs, chain of custody ledgers, touch DNA, electropherograms, and court transcripts. Unlike typical criminal records that detail only human tragedy, this archive was structured specifically as a monument to scientific perseverance and institutional accountability. Scholars, criminologists, and human rights researchers from around the globe were granted restricted access to study how a dedicated team of detectives, geneticists, and prosecutors systematically broke down 5 decades of calculated deception using microscale physical evidence. At the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children in Alexandria, Virginia, a new national directive named in Timmy's honor reached full operational status. The Vance National Cold Case Integration Framework linked federal, state, and tribal law enforcement databases into a unified real-time network. The platform utilized the exact bioinformatic algorithms and low-template DNA matching pipelines refined during Operation Fall and Whistle. As a result, long-dormant cases across the United States were continuously cross-referenced against modern genetic genealogies, automatically flagging potential familial matches and spatial-temporal correlations that would have been invisible to earlier generations of investigators. In South Boston, the physical places that had once borne witness to fear and uncertainty now radiated a profound, quiet strength. Stony Brook Reservation, where the riderless 10-speed bicycle had once rested in the shadows, was now known across the region as a sanctuary of safety and outdoor recreation. Lantern-lit walking paths wound through the pines, leading visitors directly to the heart of the Timothy Vance Memorial Peace Park. There, under the soft glow of the park lights, the bronze sculpture of the bicycle stood bright and steadfast, a timeless symbol of a boy whose memory had transformed the world. As the midnight hour settled over Boston, the final chapter of this historic case was complete in every conceivable dimension. Arthur Pendleton's dark legacy had been utterly destroyed, his false honors replaced by total public obscurity, while the name of Timmy Vance shone as an immortal beacon of hope, truth, and unyielding justice. The 50-year night was over, and in its place remained an eternal, radiant dawn that would safeguard the city for generations to come. The midnight sky over Boston hung vast and luminous, scattered with cold, brilliant stars that reflected off the gentle ripples of the harbor. Across the quiet neighborhoods of South Boston, from the historic red brick facades of Thomas Park to the dark, rustling canopy of Stony Brook Reservation, a deep and unshakable stillness took hold. The long, 50-year arc of the 1976 cold case had reached its absolute, ultimate resting point. Every strand of evidence had been traced to its end, every legal mechanism exhausted, and every heart touched by the disappearance of 15-year-old Timmy Vance brought to a state of complete and permanent peace. In the silent corridors of the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court, the official records of the landmark proceedings were bound into heavy leather volumes and enshrined in the court's permanent historic repository. Case number 76-0941 was no longer an open wound or an active docket. It was now a foundational pillar of modern American jurisprudence. Legal scholars and civil rights historians who examined the records recognized the investigation as the ultimate synthesis of advanced forensic genetics, meticulous spatial-temporal mapping, and unyielding constitutional process. The legal frameworks established during the trial of Arthur Coach Pendleton provided a clear, unassailable blueprint for prosecuting historical crimes, proving that time, influence, and calculated silence could never erect a permanent barrier against the truth. At the federal level, the advanced bioinformatic models developed during Operation Fallen Whistle were officially designated as standard protocol across all regional laboratories of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The low-template touch DNA extraction methods, pioneered on the microscopic skin cells recovered from Timmy Vance's rain-soaked leather glove, were now actively deployed in thousands of cold case investigations worldwide. In small municipal departments and major urban precincts alike, ancient evidence boxes that had gathered dust for decades were systematically opened. Because of the technical triumphs achieved in Boston, hundreds of missing persons were finally identified and long-dormant cases were closed, bringing answers and solace to families who had suffered in silence for generations. Across New England, the total erasure of Arthur Pendleton's public legacy was complete. The honor rolls, athletic awards, and community plaques that had once celebrated his decades of civic leadership had been systematically removed, destroyed, or rededicated to the victims of predatory violence. The former coach, who had spent 50 years hiding behind a carefully crafted mask of mentorship and public service, was remembered only as a hollow, defeated criminal whose elaborate web of lies was shattered by the cold, objective clarity of modern science. His dark empire had dissolved into total obscurity, leaving behind no legacy, no honor, and no defender. In South Boston, the neighborhood where the mystery had begun on a rainy autumn day in 1976 was transformed into a living symbol of resilience, unity, and healing. The streets where children had once walked under the quiet, lingering shadow of the unknown were now filled with light, laughter, and a profound sense of safety. The unmasking of the perpetrator had permanently lifted the burden of fear, proving to every family in the city that love and solidarity were infinitely stronger than secrecy and deceit.